The Montana morning came cold and clear, the kind of October dawn that burned the lungs and sharpened the mind. James Dalton stood on his cabin porch at 47 years old, watching steam rise from his coffee mug into air so clean it hurt to breathe. 40 miles from the nearest town, 60 from the nearest person who gave a damn about him, and that was exactly how he wanted it. The cabin sat at 7,400 feet, nestled in a fold of the Bitterroot Range where the aspens had already gone gold, and the first snow would come any day now. He had built most of it himself over 3 years, the kind of work that kept hands busy and minds quiet. The kind of work that didn't require thinking about Kandahar, or the 3 faces in the framed photo on his mantle, or the way a man's screams sound over a radio when an IED tears him apart. Dalton was tall, just over 6 feet, with a frame that had gone from operator lean to mountain man solid. Gray threaded through his beard now, more every month. His hands bore the scars of 28 years in the Army, everything from rope burns to shrapnel wounds to the calluses that never quite fade when you've spent half your life behind a rifle. He walked with a slight hitch in his left leg, courtesy of Fallujah in 2004, a reminder that came and went with the weather. The scar tissue went deeper than his leg. He turned back inside, boots heavy on the pine floor he'd laid himself. The cabin was simple, one main room with a wood stove, a kitchen corner, a table he'd built from local timber, a bedroom barely big enough for the bed, everything a man needed and nothing he didn't. On the wall hung his father's photograph, dress greens from the early 70s, wearing a combat infantryman badge and a look in his eyes that Dalton had come to understand only after he'd earned his own. Next to his father's photo hung the one Dalton couldn't quite take down. 5 men in Delta Force kit, somewhere in the Hindu Kush, faces you couldn't show on television, doing work you couldn't talk about in public. 3 of those faces had red circles drawn around them in marker, killed in action. His decision, his call, his fault. He had promised himself he wouldn't look at it this morning, but he looked anyway. The radio on the counter murmured low, local news out of Missoula. He only half listened until the anchor's voice shifted into that particular tone that meant dead Americans. The border crisis continues to escalate this morning, as authorities confirm 12 Border Patrol agents have been killed in the past 30 days along the Texas-New Mexico corridor. Sources say the deaths appear to be the work of highly trained snipers, with kills recorded at distances exceeding 1,000 meters. The Department of Homeland Security has called an emergency session. Dalton turned the radio off. He didn't do that anymore. Didn't think about ranges and windage, and the way a man drops when a bullet finds him at 1,800 meters. Didn't think about the weight of a rifle, or the math of external ballistics, or the silence that comes after you pull the trigger, and before the world catches up. He had left that life behind when General MacArthur Stone, the man his own father had served under decades ago, had stood in an office at Fort Bragg 3 years ago and given him a choice. Retire with honor, or drink yourself to death, and take the dishonorable discharge that would follow. Dalton had chosen honor, though some days he wasn't sure honor was worth the emptiness that came with it. He poured the rest of his coffee into the sink, watching the dark liquid swirl down the drain, and that's when he heard the sound that didn't belong. An engine, a vehicle, coming up the logging road that barely qualified as a road, that nobody used unless they were lost or looking for him. Dalton wasn't expecting anyone. He moved to the gun rack by the door, not hurrying but not wasting time either, and took down the Remington 700 300 Win Mag, the hunting rifle he actually used these days. Chambered a round. Stood to the side of the window where he could see without being seen. The vehicle that emerged from the tree line was a black Chevy Suburban, government plates, moving slow over the ruts and rocks. It stopped 30 yards from the cabin, and the driver's door opened. General Douglas MacArthur Stone stepped out. 68 years old, 6 feet even, built like a man who still did push-ups every morning and meant it. He wore civilian clothes, jeans and a canvas jacket, but he moved like a general, had always moved like a general, would die moving like a general. His hair had gone white since Dalton last saw him, but the eyes were the same, blue and hard and capable of seeing through whatever excuse you thought you had. Dalton set the rifle against the wall and opened the door. They stood looking at each other across 30 yards of Montana dirt, two men who had known each other for 47 years, since Dalton was 6 months old, and Stone had come to the house after his father returned from overseas deployment. Godfather mentor, the man who'd pinned Dalton's Ranger tab, who'd recommended him for Delta selection, who'd held him back from putting a pistol in his mouth after Kandahar. Stone walked forward, slow and deliberate, giving Dalton time to decide whether this was a conversation he wanted to have. Dalton stayed in the doorway. Stone stopped 10 feet away, hands in his pockets, breath misting in the cold. "James, been a long time." "Not long enough, sir." Stone nodded like he'd expected that. "I need you back." Dalton felt something tighten in his chest, something that might have been anger or might have been hope, and he didn't want to examine it too closely. "You ended my career," he said, "remember. I ended it to save your life. You were drinking yourself to death after Kandahar. Now I'm giving you a chance to finish what you started." "I didn't start anything," Dalton said. "I finished 3 good men." "That wasn't your fault." "Inquiry cleared me. Doesn't mean they were wrong." Stone stepped closer, and now Dalton could see the lines around his eyes, the weight the man carried, the kind of weight that comes from sending young men to die and living long enough to attend their funerals. "James, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't critical. I wouldn't ask if there was anyone else who could do this." "Do what?" "Stop a war before it starts." Dalton leaned against the doorframe, feeling the cold wood against his back, solid and real. The wind moved through the aspens with a sound like whispered warnings. "Come inside," he said. "If you're going to ruin my retirement, at least do it out of the cold." They sat at the table Dalton had built, 2 mugs of coffee between them, and Stone laid out a file folder, classified stamps across the cover, the kind of folder that meant people were dying and someone needed to do something about it. "Los Sombras," Stone said, "the shadows, that's what they call themselves. 300 former Mexican military, mostly special forces, some ex-federals, all of them bought and paid for by the Sinaloa cartel. They're not gangbangers, James. They're an army." Dalton looked at the photo Stone spread across his table. Men in tactical gear, carrying military-grade weapons, operating with fire team discipline and professional spacing. Training photos, compound layouts, faces he didn't recognize. 37 dead in 3 months, Stone continued. Border Patrol, DEA, 2 Army soldiers who had the bad luck to be in the wrong place, all of them killed by snipers, professional work. 1,400 to 2,100 meters, clean shots, no wasted ammunition. Dalton studied the ballistic reports, the range cards, the wind data. Whoever these shooters were, they knew what they were doing. "Who's training them?" Stone slid another photo across the table. The man in the picture was maybe 60, lean and hard, with gray hair and the kind of face that had seen too much sun and not enough mercy. He wore the uniform of a Mexican army colonel, but the photo was old, dated 1998. "Colonel Victor Reyes," Stone said, "former Mexican Army sniper instructor. Your father knew him." Dalton looked up. "My father." Stone pulled out a thin file, Classified stamps faded with age. 1979 through 82, there was a joint U.S.-Mexico program, anti-narcotics training. Your father was part of the instruction cadre. Reyes was one of his students. They became friends. Good friends from what the records say. Your father saved his life twice. Reyes returned the favor once. When the program ended and the Mexican government collapsed into corruption, Reyes was one of the ones who turned. He's been working for the cartels ever since. Dalton looked at the photo again, trying to see his father in it somehow, trying to imagine the man who'd taught him to shoot also teaching this man, this enemy. What does he want? Stone opened another folder. He wants to establish what he calls a buffer zone. 150 miles of Texas and New Mexico border that the United States effectively cannot control. He wants to prove that the cartels can defeat the U.S. military on our own soil. He wants to humiliate us. And the Mexican government won't admit the problem exists. Officially, Los Sombras is just cartel propaganda. Unofficially, they're terrified. Reyes has more combat power than some Mexican states. If we go in heavy, it becomes an international incident. If we do nothing, Americans keep dying. So you want a small team, Dalton said. Deniable, off the books. Go in, eliminate the sniper cadre, decapitate the command structure. Exactly. And you came to me because... Stone pulled one last piece of paper from the folder. It was a letter, handwritten in Spanish. Stone translated as he read. To the son of Sergeant Major William Dalton. Your father taught me to shoot. He taught me honor. He taught me that a warrior fights for something greater than himself. When my family was killed by your DEA, when your government abandoned those of us who bled for your drug war, I learned that honor is a lie told by powerful men to control dangerous ones. Now I will use everything your father taught me to destroy what he fought for. Come and stop me, if the son is half the man his father was. The letter was signed Victor Reyes. Dalton set it down carefully, feeling the weight of words, the weight of legacy, the weight of a dead father's choices becoming a living son's burden. This is personal, he said. Stone nodded. He's challenging you, challenging your family name. If you don't respond, he wins. If you do respond and fail, he still wins. The only way to beat him is to be better than he expects. What makes you think I'm better than he expects? Dalton asked. Last time I made a tactical decision, 3 men died. Stone reached across the table, grabbed Dalton's wrist hard enough to hurt. Listen to me, Kandahar was not your fault. You made the best call with the information you had. The intel was wrong. The leak was real. You saved 2 men by splitting that team. If you'd kept them together, all 5 would have hit that IED. But 3 still died. Yes, and you can spend the rest of your life in this cabin feeling sorry for yourself. Or you can come back and make their deaths mean something. Dalton pulled his hand away, stood up, walked to the window. Outside, the aspens trembled in wind that smelled like snow. He thought about his father, thought about the weight of a rifle, thought about 3 faces circled in red. When do I leave? Tomorrow morning, Stone said. Fort Bliss. You'll meet your team there. Team, I work alone. Not anymore. The operator I've assigned as your partner is the best long-range shooter in the Army right now. You'll need her. Sorry. Stone smiled just a little. Wait until you meet Captain Sarah Mackenzie. She's going to love you. The flight from Missoula to El Paso took 6 hours with a layover in Denver, and Dalton spent most of it watching America pass beneath him at 30,000 feet. Mountains giving way to plains, giving way to desert. He thought about his father, about stories the old man had told in the last years before the cancer took him. Stories about training foreign soldiers who would become allies or enemies, depending on which way politics blew. About the impossible choices you make when the politicians write checks your body has to cash. Fort Bliss sprawled across the Texas desert like a small city, all brown and tan and dust, 140 degrees in summer and cold as hell in winter, and always the wind. Dalton had been through here a dozen times over his career, knew the ranges and the briefing rooms and the particular smell of a desert military base, creosote and diesel and sweat. A specialist met him at the airfield, drove him to the task force building in silence. The building was unmarked, concrete block, the kind of place where people plan things they'd deny under oath. Colonel Hayes was waiting in the briefing room, 50-something, Marine Corps, the kind of officer who still looked like he could pass the physical fitness test and meant it. He stood when Dalton entered, offered his hand. "Sergeant Dalton, your reputation precedes you." "Most of it's exaggerated," Dalton said. "The part about the 2,400-meter kill in Afghanistan. That part's true." Hayes gestured to a chair. "Then you're exactly who we need. Let me show you what we're up against." The briefing took an hour. Satellite imagery of the target compound, 60 miles inside U.S. territory, yes, inside, established on federal land in the Big Bend sector where the border was more theoretical than actual. Intel reports on Los Sombras, their training, their capabilities, their rules of engagement, which apparently included none. Estimates on sniper positions, 8 to 12 enemy shooters on elevated terrain, covering all approaches to the compound. "A SEAL team will handle the assault," Hayes said. "Your job is counter-sniper. Eliminate the overwatch before they move in. We estimate you'll have maybe 5 hours to clear 8 to 12 professional shooters from positions ranging from 1,600 to 2,400 meters." Dalton studied the topographic maps, the sight lines, the wind data. "That's a tall order for one shooter." "You'll have two," Hayes said and looked at the door. "Captain Mackenzie, join us, please." The woman who entered the briefing room was 29, maybe 5'6", built like someone who ran mountains for fun. Dark hair pulled back tight, brown eyes that assessed Dalton in about 2 seconds and seemed unimpressed. She wore Army ACUs with a Ranger tab, airborne wings, and a combat infantry badge that meant she'd been in the shit and survived. She moved like a fighter, walked like she had nothing to prove and everything to protect. "Captain Sarah Mackenzie," Hayes said, "currently holds the record for longest confirmed kill by a female Army sniper. 2,340 meters, Syria, 2023. She didn't smile, didn't offer her hand, just looked at Dalton with the kind of expression that said she'd read his file and found it wanting. "Sergeant Dalton," she said, "I've read your record, impressive for the 2000s, but long-range shooting's evolved since you retired. Have you trained on the new ballistic computers, the AI-assisted wind reading systems, the integrated range-finding optics?" Dalton kept his face neutral. "I use a Kestrel weather meter and my brain." Mackenzie's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Amusement maybe, or pity. "Right, old school. Well, try to keep up." Hayes cleared his throat. "You two will insert into the Big Bend sector at 0300 tomorrow. You'll have 48 hours to recon the target and establish firing positions. The SEAL element moves at 0600 day after tomorrow. Any questions?" Mackenzie spoke first. "Rules of engagement. Weapons free on any armed hostile. This is U.S. soil, but the targets are foreign combatants conducting military operations against American forces. The lawyers have blessed it." "Exfil plan?" Dalton asked. "Helicopter extraction from designated LZ, 30 minutes after compound is secure. If compromise occurs before the op, you abort to alternate extraction point alpha. We'll get you out. What's the threat assessment on compromise? Hayes hesitated just for a second and Dalton saw it. Reyes knows you're coming, doesn't he? Hayes nodded slowly. We have to assume he has intelligence on our planning cycle. He's had it before. Someone's feeding him information, we just don't know who. So we're walking into a situation where the enemy knows we're coming, knows roughly when, and has had time to prepare, Dalton said. That's not an operation, that's a suicide mission. It's what we have, Hayes said, and it's what those 12 dead Border Patrol agents deserved before they died. The room went quiet. Mackenzie broke the silence. I'm in, when do we kit up? Tomorrow 0100. You'll have access to the full armory. Pick your weapons, pick your gear. Dalton, you'll bunk in Building 7. Captain, you're in Building 9. They stood. Hayes walked them to the door, stopped them before they left. One more thing. Reyes sent another message. It came through back-channel intel 2 days ago. What did it say? Mackenzie asked. Hayes handed Dalton a printout. The message was short. Tell James Dalton that his father died believing America was worth dying for. I want him to die knowing it was all a lie. Dalton folded the paper, put it in his pocket. Anything else? Hayes shook his head. Dismissed. They walked out into the Texas heat, 108 degrees at 3 in the afternoon, the sun, a physical weight pressing down. Mackenzie walked beside him, not quite matching his stride but not falling behind either. So, she said, you really think old-school methods are going to work against a professional sniper cadre? Dalton kept walking. I think methods are just tools. Old or new doesn't matter if you don't know when to use them. And you think I don't know when to use them? I think you've made 43 kills and you're confident. And confidence is good right up until it gets you killed. She stopped walking. How do you know my kill count? That's not in the public record. Dalton stopped, turned to face her. It's in your eyes. You've seen men die through a scope and you're good with it, but you haven't seen enough to be humble about it. You think technology and training make you invincible. They don't. They make you capable. There's a difference. Mackenzie's jaw tightened. And how many of your kills were shooting back? Dalton met her eyes, held them. All of them. She stared at him for a long moment, reassessing, recalculating. 7 of mine were, she said quietly. The rest were targets who never knew I was there. Then you've never faced an enemy who's as good as you are, Dalton said. Reyes and his people are. Don't treat this like a range exercise. Treat it like war because that's what it is. He started walking again. Mackenzie caught up. You know, not everything old is better just because it's old. Dalton allowed himself a small smile. And not everything new works just because it's new. Let's see whose methods work when people start shooting. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the armory, a climate-controlled warehouse full of enough weapons to start a small war. Mackenzie went straight for the high-tech gear, a custom-built AR platform in 6.5 Creedmoor with an integrated ballistic computer, thermal optics, the works. She handled it like a musician with a familiar instrument, smooth and confident. Dalton walked past all of it to the back wall where the older weapons lived. He found what he was looking for, a Remington Model 700 in .338 Lapua Magnum, old enough to have actual wear marks, new enough to be perfectly maintained. The scope was a Schmidt and Bender 5-25, no computer assist, just glass and math and the human eye. The armorer, a gray-haired sergeant who looked like he'd been issuing weapons since the Gulf War, raised an eyebrow. "That's a museum piece," he said. "It's a tool," Dalton replied. "Does it shoot straight?" "Straighter than most men can aim." "Then it'll do." Mackenzie came over, looked at his rifle, looked at hers. "You're really going to use that? No computer, no thermal, no range assist." "Computers fail, batteries die, glass and steel don't." "What about wind reading?" Dalton pulled out a Kestrel handheld weather meter, about the size of a cell phone, older model but reliable. "This tells me what the wind's doing where I am. My eyes tell me what it's doing downrange. My brain does the math. And if your brain makes a mistake, then I miss and probably die. Same as you if your computer glitches at the wrong time." They stared at each other, neither backing down, and the armorer chuckled. "You two are going to get along great." They choppered out at 0300, a Black Hawk flying nap of the earth across the desert, the landscape below rendered in shades of gray by night vision. Dalton sat across from Mackenzie, watching her check and recheck her gear with the kind of focus that came from doing this enough times to have a system. She caught him looking. "What?" "Nothing, just noticing you're thorough." "You say that like it's unusual." "It's not, it's good. Thorough keeps you alive." She adjusted her plate carrier, tightened a strap. "Why'd you really retire? The file says medical discharge, but you don't look medically unfit." Dalton looked out the open door of the helo, watching the desert scroll by at 120 knots. "File's accurate." "What kind of medical?" "The kind where I got 3 good men killed, because I made the wrong call." Mackenzie went quiet for a minute. The rotors beat their rhythm overhead, a sound that every combat veteran knows in their bones, the sound that means you're going somewhere dangerous or leaving somewhere worse. "Afghanistan?" she asked. Dalton nodded. "What happened?" He told her. Not all of it, but enough. The mission in Kandahar, the HVT they'd been sent to eliminate, the successful shot at 2475 meters, the extraction, the ambush, the decision to split the team because he thought he knew where the danger was, the IED that had been waiting on the route he'd sent them, the 3 men who died instantly, the 2 he'd saved by keeping them with him. "The inquiry cleared me," he said. "Leak in the intel chain," they said. "No way I could have known, but I should have known, should have been more careful, should have waited for better information." "You saved 2 men." "I killed 3. Mackenzie leaned forward. "If you'd kept the team together, all 5 would have hit that IED. You saved 2 lives by making the call you made. That's not failure, Sergeant. That's command." Dalton looked at her, really looked, and saw something in her eyes that surprised him. Understanding. Not pity, not sympathy, but the understanding that comes from having made life and death decisions and having to live with the outcomes. "How old are you?" he asked. 29. "You talk like you're 50. "I had a good teacher," she said. "He taught me that every shot matters, every decision counts, and if you're not prepared to live with the consequences, you shouldn't pull the trigger." Sounds like a smart man. He was. He died in Syria covering our exfil. Took a round meant for me. Dalton saw it then, the thing behind her confidence, the weight she carried that made her sharper and harder and more dangerous than her years suggested. What was his name? Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, best spotter I ever had. He spotted that 2340-meter shot, made the wind call, made the range call. All I did was pull the trigger. And you've been trying to prove you deserved to be the one who lived ever since. She didn't answer, but she didn't have to. The pilot's voice came through their headsets. 2 minutes to LZ. They locked and loaded, made ready. Dalton pulled on his pack, 60 pounds of gear, water, ammunition, everything he'd need to survive in hostile country for 48 hours. Mackenzie did the same, moving with practiced efficiency. The helo flared, settled into a hover 6 feet off the deck. They fast roped out, hit the ground, moved to cover while the Black Hawk thundered away into the darkness. Silence fell like a weight. They were 12 miles from the target compound, in broken country that rose from desert floor to mountain ridge, in darkness so complete the stars looked close enough to touch. The temperature was 92 degrees, would drop to 60 by dawn, would climb back to 110 by noon. Mackenzie pulled out a tablet, brought up satellite imagery overlaid with GPS. Dalton pulled out a paper map and a red lens flashlight. She looked at him. "Are you kidding?" "Batteries die," he said again. "Paper doesn't." They plotted their route, arguing in whispers about the best approach, finally agreeing on a compromise that took the high ground but avoided the most obvious ridgelines. They moved out, Dalton on point, Mackenzie 5 meters back, weapons ready, senses stretched. The desert at night is never silent. Coyotes called in the distance. Small things rustled in the brush. The wind moved through arroyos and canyons with sounds like breathing. They walked for 4 hours, covering 8 miles, climbing 2,000 feet in elevation, and by the time the first gray light touched the eastern horizon, they were in position on a ridge overlooking the valley where the compound sat. Dalton went prone, pulled out his binoculars and glassed the target. What he saw made his gut tighten. The compound was a fortress. 10-foot walls, guard towers, fighting positions cut into the ridges all around it. He counted positions for at least 8 snipers, maybe more, covering every approach with overlapping fields of fire. Whoever had designed this defense knew what they were doing. Mackenzie set up her spotting scope, started taking notes. "I count 8 probable hides," she said. "Ranges from 1,600 to 2,300 meters from the compound center. They've got the high ground on 3 sides." Dalton studied the terrain, the angles, the dead ground. "They left the north ridge open," he said. "Why?" Mackenzie zoomed in on the northern ridge, then checked her map. "It's a sheer cliff, 300-foot vertical drop. No way to approach from that side without climbing gear, and you'd be completely exposed during the climb. So they left it open because they don't think anyone's stupid enough to use it." Mackenzie looked at him. "Are you suggesting we're stupid enough to use it?" "I'm suggesting that's where they won't be looking." They spent the next hour setting up their hide, a shallow scrape behind a cluster of rocks on a ridge 2,100 meters north of the compound. They covered it with camouflage netting, arranged it to blend with the surrounding terrain, made it invisible to anyone who wasn't standing on top of it. By full daylight, they were invisible. Mackenzie set up her rifle, ran her ballistic computer through calibration, adjusted her scope settings. Dalton set up his rifle, pulled out his range card, and started doing math with a pencil and a calculator that was older than she was. She watched him work. "You know there's an app for that." "Apps don't work without signal. We're 60 miles from the nearest cell tower." "I have satellite uplink, which broadcasts your position every time it handshakes with the bird." Mackenzie paused. "You're paranoid." "I'm careful, there's a difference." They settled in to watch, to wait, to learn the rhythm of the compound below. Guards changed shift every 4 hours. Patrols walked the perimeter every 90 minutes. And on the ridges around the valley, barely visible even through optics, Dalton started to pick out the sniper hides. "There," he said, pointing, 1,800 meters, ridge to the west. See the rock that looks like a seated man. Mackenzie looked. I see the rock, I don't see a hide. You won't, but watch the shadows. Watch how they move when the wind blows. She watched. After 5 minutes she saw it, the tiny inconsistency, the shadow that moved wrong. Holy shit, that's good. That's professional. These aren't kids with hunting rifles. These are operators. Mackenzie started marking positions on her map, using her computer to calculate exact ranges and ballistic solutions. Dalton did the same with his rangefinder and his notebook, old-school math that had kept men alive since before computers existed. By noon, they had identified 6 definite sniper positions and 2 probables. Mackenzie ran the numbers. 8 shooters, 5 hours to clear them before the SEAL assault. That's 37 minutes per target, assuming we don't miss. Dalton looked at the positions, looked at the ranges, looked at the angles. We won't get them all, not in 5 hours. Some of those hides are positioned so we can't get line of sight without exposing ourselves. So what do? We prioritize. The ones who can hit the SEALs we take out first. The ones who can only hit us we leave for last and hope we're better. Mackenzie pulled out an energy bar, started eating. You ever think about what happens if we're not better? Every day, Dalton said, every single day. They ate, they hydrated, they watched. The afternoon heat climbed past 105, turned the rocks into griddles and the air into soup. Sweat soaked through their clothes, evaporated in the dry air, soaked through again. This was the kind of heat that killed people who weren't ready for it, the kind of heat that made every breath an effort and every movement deliberate. Dalton had been in worse, had spent weeks in the Iraqi desert, in the Afghan mountains, in places where the heat was a weapon as deadly as bullets. Mackenzie looked uncomfortable but functional, and he gave her credit for that. A lot of soldiers, even good ones, fell apart in heat like this. At 1600 hours, Mackenzie's radio crackled. SEAL team checking in, confirming they were in position and waiting for the green light. At 1700 hours, the sun started its descent toward the western hills, and the shadows began to lengthen. At 1800 hours, Dalton saw movement in the compound, vehicles arriving, men gathering. Through his binoculars, he watched a tall man emerge from the main building, gray-haired, moving with the confidence of command. That's Ray's, Dalton said. Mackenzie looked through her scope. You sure? Dalton studied the man's face, the way he moved, the way other men deferred to him. I'm sure. They watched Ray's walk the compound, inspecting positions, talking to his men. At one point, he looked directly at the northern ridge, directly at where Dalton and Mackenzie lay hidden, and Dalton felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. Ray's couldn't possibly see them at this distance, through this camouflage. But it felt like he was looking right at them. Then Ray's smiled, raised his hand and waved. Mackenzie's breath caught. Did he just wave at us? Dalton's radio crackled, a frequency he hadn't been monitoring, a voice he'd never heard but somehow knew. The voice spoke in English, accent-free, calm as a man discussing the weather. Hello, James, I'd recognize your patience anywhere. 48 hours to get into position, another 12 watching and waiting before you make your move. Methodical, careful, just like your father taught you. Did he ever tell you about our friendship? About the times I saved his life in Mexico? About the times he saved mine? Before your government betrayed us, before your DEA killed my family, before any of this became necessary. Dalton didn't respond, but his finger moved to his transmit button. Don't, Mackenzie whispered. He's trying to bait you. Reyes continued. I'm going to kill your partner first, James. Let you watch. Let you feel what I felt when your people took everything from me. Then I'll kill you. Not because I hate you. I don't. I hate what you represent. I hate the lie your father believed. The lie that America values the warriors who bleed for it. You and I both know better now, don't we? We both know what happens to soldiers when they're no longer useful. The transmission ended. Silence filled the desert. Mackenzie looked at Dalton. He knows we're here. He's known the whole time. Dalton nodded slowly, mind racing, recalculating everything. This isn't an operation anymore, he said. It's a trap. He knew we'd come. He's been waiting for us. So what do we do? Dalton looked at the compound, at the sniper positions, at the man who had trained with his father and learned from him, and turned everything he'd learned into weapons against the country that had made him. We spring the trap, Dalton said, but we do it our way. We make him react to us instead of us reacting to him. How? Dalton started repacking his gear. We move. New position. He thinks he knows where we are, we make him wrong. Then we start taking his snipers one by one, and we make him wonder if maybe the student isn't quite ready to beat the teacher. Mackenzie started packing too. You think your father was better than him? I think my father taught him to shoot, but I don't think he taught him everything. Some things you only learn when you're willing to die for something bigger than yourself. And what are you willing to die for? Dalton looked at her. Making sure you don't have to. They moved out as the sun touched the horizon, moving fast and low, displacing 400 meters to a new ridge with a different angle on the compound. The light was failing, shadows spreading like spilled ink, and in the darkness they disappeared completely. From their new position, Dalton glassed the compound again, looking for changes, looking for reactions. Reyes was still visible, talking with his men, and after a few minutes, Dalton saw it. Saw the moment when Reyes realized they weren't where he expected them to be. Saw him gesture to the northern ridge, saw men move to investigate. Dalton keyed his radio, short click, no words. The signal the SEAL team was waiting for, compromised. Mission delay, stand by. Mackenzie set up her rifle. When do we start? Dalton settled behind his scope, found his breathing, found his calm. Now, he said, before they figure out where we went. He found the first sniper hide, the one on the western ridge at 1,800 meters. Through his scope at maximum magnification, he could just make out the shape of the hide, the inconsistency in the shadows. He couldn't see the shooter, but he knew he was there. Dalton pulled out his Kestrel, checked the wind. 8 miles per hour from the northwest. Temperature dropping fast, down to 80 degrees. Humidity rising as the desert cooled. He did the math in his head, the kind of math that had been second nature for 28 years, the kind of math that turned physics into death. Elevation 43.2 MOA, windage 6.8 left. He dialed his scope, settled his breathing, found the natural respiratory pause between breaths where the body is stillest. And waited. 10 minutes passed, 15. The light continued to fail. Then, just for a moment, the wind shifted the camouflage netting on the hide, and Dalton saw the glint of a scope lens catching the last light of day. He fired. The rifle kicked. The sound rolled across the desert like thunder. Through the scope, Dalton watched the figure in the hide slump. Hit, he said quietly. Target down at 1,803 meters. Mackenzie was already scanning for reactions. The compound's lighting up. They know we're here. Good, Dalton said, chambering another round. Now they know we mean business. He settled back behind his scope, searching for the next target, and in the gathering darkness, the real war began. The echo of Dalton's rifle still rolled across the desert when the compound erupted. Spotlights blazed to life, sweeping the ridges like searchlights hunting bombers. Men poured from buildings, weapons ready, voices shouting in Spanish. Somewhere in the darkness, a siren began to wail, mechanical and urgent, the universal sound of a defense coming alive. Mackenzie pressed herself lower into the rocks, eye to her scope, scanning the chaos below. "They're mobilizing fast," she said. 20-plus personnel moving to fighting positions, vehicle engines starting. "Let them," Dalton replied, already searching for his next target. "Panic is good. Panic makes people careless." He found what he was looking for on the eastern ridge, 1,600 meters distant. Another sniper hide, this one less carefully concealed, the shooter inside probably younger, less experienced. Through his scope, Dalton could see movement, the panicked shifting of someone who just heard their teammate die and didn't know where the shot had come from. Mackenzie's scope was already tracking the same target. "I have visual," she said. "Eastern Ridge 1600. Target is moving, looks rattled." "Wind call." She checked her handheld anemometer, compared it to the vegetation movement downrange. 7 miles per hour, variable gusts to 10, right to left. Dalton's Kestrel showed the same. The temperature had dropped to 78 degrees, the air was getting denser, the bullet would fly differently than it had 20 minutes ago. He ran the calculations, feeling the numbers settle into his mind with the familiarity of long practice. "I'll take this one," Mackenzie said. "You keep scanning for the others." Dalton glanced at her, saw the focus in her eyes, the steadiness of her breathing. She'd positioned herself well, had good cheek weld on her stock, was doing everything right. "Your shot," he said, "make it count." She settled, went still in that way shooters do when the whole world narrows to the scope and the target and the space between heartbeats. Dalton had seen it thousands of times, had felt it himself more times than he could count. That moment when you stop being a person and become an instrument, a tool designed for one specific purpose. Mackenzie's rifle cracked. Through his own optic, Dalton watched the target jerk and fall. "Hit," she said, voice flat, "target down." "Good shooting." She was already working the bolt, chambering a fresh round, scanning for the next threat. No celebration, no relief, just the mechanical process of continuing to work. Dalton approved. The ones who celebrated were the ones who lost focus, and losing focus got you killed. The compound below was in full alert now, but the confusion was spreading rather than resolving. They knew they were under attack, knew they'd lost 2 shooters, but they didn't know where the fire was coming from. The spotlights swept the northern ridge where Dalton and Mackenzie had been, found nothing, swept back to search again. "They're looking in the wrong place," Mackenzie observed. "For now, Reyes will figure it out. He's too good not to." As if summoned by his name, the radio crackled again. Reyes's voice, still calm, still conversational, like they were old friends catching up. "2 shots, 2 kills. At 1,800 and 1,600 meters in failing light with shifting wind. Impressive, James. Your father would be proud, but you've given away your general position now. My remaining snipers are adjusting. Let's see how you do against prepared defenses." The transmission ended. Dalton keyed his radio, breaking protocol, unable to resist. "Your students are dying, Victor. How many are you willing to lose?" The response came immediately. "All of them if necessary. They knew the price when they signed up. Did yours? The 3 men in Kandahar, did they know you'd send them to their deaths?" Dalton's finger tightened on the transmit button, jaw clenched, but Mackenzie's hand shot out, stopped him. "Don't," she said. "He's baiting you. making it personal so you'll make mistakes. She was right. Dalton forced himself to breathe, to let the anger pass through him like wind through grass, present but not permanent. "You okay?" Mackenzie asked. "Fine." "You don't sound fine." "I'm functional, that's all that matters." She studied him for a moment, then nodded and returned to her scope. The trust in that gesture, the assumption that he'd keep his head in the game despite the psychological warfare, meant more than Dalton wanted to examine. "Movement," Mackenzie said. "Northern Ridge, our old position. 3 personnel moving up, looks like they're going to investigate." "Range." She checked her rangefinder. 2,200 meters from us, but we've got a bad angle. They're using the ridge line for cover. "Can you get a shot?" "Not without exposing myself. That ridge is too high." Dalton studied the terrain through his binoculars. The men were climbing carefully, tactically sound, using cover and concealment. Professional movement. If they reached the old hide site, they'd find evidence of occupation, would be able to triangulate roughly where Dalton and Mackenzie might have displaced to. "We need to relocate again," he said, "before they narrow down our position." "Where to?" Dalton scanned the surrounding terrain. They were on the Northern Ridge Complex, a series of interconnected high points that offered multiple positions but limited routes between them. Moving meant exposure, meant noise, meant risk. "Southwest, 400 meters. There's a saddle between 2 peaks that'll give us angles on the western hides and keep us concealed from the compound." "That puts us farther from the target," Mackenzie pointed out. "Ranges will increase to 2,500 meters. You said your record was 2340. This'll give you a chance to break it." "In the dark, with variable wind. That's not breaking records, that's hoping for miracles." Dalton was already packing his gear, movements efficient and practiced. "Then we'd better start believing in miracles. Move in 2 minutes. I'll go first, you cover, then you follow and I'll cover." Mackenzie hesitated, just for a second. "You know, they've probably got night vision down there." "Probably, so we move fast and we move smart. 2 minutes." He finished packing, did a final scope sweep of the compound. The 3 men were still climbing toward the old position. The compound had settled into defensive posture, guards on high alert, snipers repositioned and waiting. It was a killing field down there, every approach covered, every angle watched. Dalton loved a challenge. He moved. 400 meters doesn't sound like much until you're crossing it in hostile territory at night with 60 pounds of gear on your back and people actively hunting you. Dalton covered the ground in 8 minutes, moving in short bursts from cover to cover, using every fold in the terrain, every shadow, every bit of dead ground that put earth between him and enemy optics. Twice he froze, absolutely still, when spotlight beams swept near his position. The human eye is drawn to movement, struggles with stillness. He'd learned that in Iraq, learned it again in Afghanistan, learned it so thoroughly that going motionless was as natural as breathing. He reached the saddle position, established security, keyed his radio twice. The signal for all clear. Mackenzie came across faster than he'd expected, low and quick, athletic in a way that spoke of hard training and harder experience. She dropped into cover beside him, breathing elevated but controlled. "That was fun," she said. "Your definition of fun is concerning," says the man who just leopard crawled 200 meters through cactus. They set up again, Mackenzie on the primary rifle, Dalton on the spotting scope. The new position was good, gave them angles on 3 of the remaining sniper hides, all of them at ranges that would test even the best shooters. Mackenzie ranged the nearest target. 2,300 meters. Wind is all over the place at this distance. I'm reading 8 at our position, but look at that creosote halfway down. It's bending like it's seeing 15, maybe 20. Dalton glassed the vegetation between them and the target, reading the wind like a language he'd spoken since childhood. His father had taught him, long before the army, how to watch grass and leaves and dust, how to see the invisible river of air that carried bullets off course. "You're right," he said. "There's a canyon effect happening in that draw, winds accelerating through the gap. You'll need to hold an extra 3, maybe 4 MOA to compensate." Mackenzie's fingers moved on her ballistic computer, inputting data, running calculations. Dalton did the same math in his head, arrived at the same answer through a different path. Old school and new school, arriving at the same truth. "I'm showing 52.8 MOA elevation, 14.2 windage," she said. "I get 52.6 and 14.5. "Close enough. Who do we trust?" Dalton pulled out a coin, started to flip it, stopped. "Your computer factors things I can't measure. Air density, Coriolis. Use your solution." "You sure?" "No, but that's why they call it a calculated risk. The calculating part means you did the math. The risk part means it still might be wrong." Mackenzie settled behind her rifle, adjusted her scope to the calculated solution. Through the spotting scope, Dalton could see the target hide, could see the barely visible shape of the sniper inside, watching the compound, unaware that death was ranging him from nearly a mile and a half away. "Send it," Dalton said quietly. Mackenzie's breathing slowed, deepened, found the rhythm. Her finger took up the slack on the trigger, steady pressure, no jerk, no flinch. The rifle fired with a sound like a door slamming in an empty house. The recoil rocked her, but she stayed in the scope, watching. Dalton stayed in the spotting scope, watching the same point. At this range, the bullet would be in flight for over 3 seconds. 3 seconds was enough time to doubt, to hope, to pray. The figure in the hide jerked, went still. "Hit," Dalton confirmed. "Solid center mass. Target down at 2,300. Mackenzie exhaled slowly. "That's 3. 5 to go, if our count is right. Maybe more if Reyes has reserves we haven't spotted." The compound was adapting now, learning. The spotlights stopped their random searching and began to focus on likely sniper positions, the high ground, the ridges with clear sight lines. Dalton watched the pattern, saw the intelligence behind it. "Reyes is directing their search," he said. "See how they're checking the military crests, the positions with cover and defilade. He's thinking like we think. Because you trained him, or your father did." "Same difference. My father's knowledge is my knowledge. What he learned, he taught me. What he taught me is what's keeping us alive right now." Mackenzie pulled out a protein bar, ate mechanically, hydrated from her camel back. The temperature had dropped into the low 70s, almost pleasant if you ignored the fact that people were actively trying to kill you. "Tell me about your father," she said. "Why?" "Because we're stuck on this mountain together for the next 4 hours, and I'd rather know who I'm fighting beside." Dalton considered that, decided it was fair. Sergeant Major William Dalton served in multiple theaters from the 70s through the 90s. Scout sniper, back when they barely had formal training for it, just guys who could shoot straight and had patience. He stayed in the Army after his combat tour, did the school circuit, taught marksmanship, taught fieldcraft. In '79, he got picked for a joint program with Mexico, training their military for counter-narcotics operations. And that's where he met Reyes. My father never talked much about it, but I found his journals after he died. He wrote about Ray's like he was writing about a son. Said he was the best natural shooter he'd ever trained. Said Ray's had the stillness of stone and the eyes of an eagle. Said if he'd been born American, he'd have made Delta Force easy. What happened? What always happens when politics meets warriors. The program ended, the money dried up, the American advisors came home. The Mexican soldiers we'd trained were left to fight a drug war with no support and no resources while their own government rotted from corruption. Some of them quit. Some of them died. Some of them, like Ray's, switched sides, joined the people who could actually pay them, who actually valued what they could do. You sound like you sympathize with him. I understand him. There's a difference. My father wrote that the worst thing we ever did was train warriors and then abandon them. Leave them with skills that make them dangerous and no honorable way to use those skills. That's how you create enemies. Mackenzie was quiet for a long moment. My father was a cop, she said. Detroit PD, 26 years. He taught me to shoot when I was 8. Told me that having the skill meant having the responsibility to use it right. He died responding to a robbery, took 3 rounds protecting civilians he didn't know. They gave him a medal. It's buried with him because my mother couldn't stand to look at it. I'm sorry. Don't be. He died doing what he believed in. That's more than most people get. Is that why you joined? To finish what he started? Maybe, or maybe I just needed to prove I could be as brave as he was. You're here, aren't you? On a mountain in Texas, shooting at cartel snipers in the dark. I'd say you proved it. She smiled just a little. You're not what I expected, Sergeant Dalton. What did you expect? Broken down old-timer living in the past, unable to adapt. And what did you get? Mackenzie looked at him, really looked, and something in her expression shifted. A warrior who's still sharp enough to teach me things. Before Dalton could respond, his radio crackled. Not Ray's this time. Lucas Chen, the SEAL team leader, voice tense. Overwatch Griffin 6. We have movement. Multiple heat signatures incoming your position from the south. Estimate 2-0 personnel, 800 meters and closing fast. Dalton snatched up his binoculars, glassed south. In the starlight, enhanced by his optic, he could see them. A squad-sized element, maybe more, moving in tactical formation up the ridge, not the panicked response of earlier. This was a deliberate flanking maneuver. Mackenzie saw them too. They're trying to fix us in place, pin us down while they close. Dalton's mind raced through options. They could displace again, but the enemy was close enough to hear movement to follow. They could try to break contact, but that meant abandoning the Overwatch mission, leaving the SEALs without counter-sniper support. Or they could fight. Distance to the flanking element, he asked. Mackenzie checked her rangefinder. 780 meters and closing. They'll be in small arms range in 10 minutes. Then we have 10 minutes to convince them this is a bad idea. You take the sniper hides. I'll discourage our friends to the south. You can't fight 20 men alone. I don't plan to fight them. I plan to make them reconsider their life choices. Dalton shifted his rifle, oriented south. 780 meters was close for the 338 Lapua, almost too close, like using a sledgehammer to crack an egg. But it would work. Through his scope, he could see the lead element, 3 men moving in overwatch positions while the main body followed. Professional tactics. Someone down there knew what they were doing. Dalton found the lead man, a figure moving carefully from cover to cover. Range 740 meters, wind negligible at this distance. He did the math quickly, dialed his scope. Mackenzie was already engaging the western sniper hide, her rifle cracking. the muzzle blast bright in the darkness. Dalton shut out the sound, focused on his target, on his breathing, on the fundamentals that had kept him alive through 100 firefights. He fired. The lead man dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Dalton worked the bolt smoothly, found the second in line, fired again. Another hit. The advancing element scattered, dove for cover, and the organized advance became chaos. "Keep moving," Dalton said calmly, firing a third shot that kicked up dust near a cluster of fighters. "Make them think there's more of us than there are." Mackenzie's rifle fired again. Through the spotting scope, Dalton saw another sniper hide go dark. "That's 4 down," she reported, 4 to go. The advancing element had gone to ground, taking cover, no longer advancing. Dalton could see muzzle flashes starting to wink in the darkness as they returned fire, but at 700 meters with rifles designed for close quarters, their rounds weren't even close. "They're pinned," Mackenzie observed, "but they're not retreating." "They will. Reyes is smart enough to know when to cut losses." "You sure about that?" Dalton fired again, not at a person but at the rock one fighter was hiding behind, the impact close enough to convince the man that staying put was unhealthy. The fighter broke and ran, scrambling downhill. "One runs, they all run," Dalton said. "Watch." He was right. Within 30 seconds, the entire element was withdrawing, bounding back the way they'd come under covering fire that didn't come close to effective range. Mackenzie watched them go. "You just broke a squad-sized element with 6 shots." 7, I missed one." "Still impressive." "It's psychology, not marksmanship. Make the enemy think the cost is higher than the gain. They'll choose to live and fight another day." "What about the ones who don't care about the cost?" "Those are the ones you kill first and ask questions never." The compound below had gone quiet, watchful. No more advancing elements. No more spotlight searches. They'd learned that movement drew fire, that fire meant death. Dalton approved of students who learned quickly, even when those students were trying to kill him. Mackenzie returned to scanning the remaining sniper hides. "I've got a problem," she said. "The 3 western hides all have overlapping fields of fire. I can't engage one without exposing myself to the others." "Show me." She walked him through it with the spotting scope. She was right. The positions were mutually supporting, set up by someone who understood how to create a defensive network. Classic military doctrine: cover your weaknesses with overlapping strengths. "We need to draw them out," Dalton said. "Make them move, break the mutual support." "How?" He thought about it, analyzing the problem from multiple angles, looking for the pattern that would solve it. "We make them think we're repositioning. I move loud, obvious to that ridgeline to the west. You stay here quiet. When they shift to track my movement, you'll have angles on at least 2 of them." "That's using yourself as bait." "That's using myself as a distraction. There's a difference." "A pretty thin difference." "Thin is better than none. You have a better idea." She didn't. Dalton checked his watch. 0200 hours. 4 hours until the SEAL assault. They needed to clear these positions, needed to give Lucas and his team a fighting chance. "I'm moving in 5, he said. "When you see them react, start shooting. Fastest you've ever shot." "What if they don't react?" "They will. Reyes trained them, and Reyes knows that flanking is how you win. They'll try to get an angle on me." "And if you're wrong?" "Then you'll have a very easy time identifying my body. I'll be the one full of bullet holes." "That's not funny." "Wasn't meant to be." He gathered his gear, did a final check of his rifle. 40 rounds remaining. Enough. it would have to be enough. Mackenzie grabbed his arm before he could move. Dalton, don't die stupidly. I'll do my best. I mean it, Tor's died covering me. I don't need another ghost. Her eyes were intense, almost fierce, and Dalton saw the weight she carried, the survivor's guilt that matched his own. I'm not planning to die at all, he said, but if I do, it won't be your fault. It'll be my choice. Remember that. He moved before she could respond, scrambling west along the ridge, making noise, dislodging rocks, being everything a good sniper should never be. Obvious, loud, target-shaped. Through her scope 400 meters away, Mackenzie watched the western sniper hides, waiting for movement, for adjustment, for any sign that the bait was working. It took 2 minutes. The northernmost hide shifted, subtle but visible, the shooter inside reorienting to track Dalton's movement. Mackenzie's crosshairs settled on the position, range 2,400 meters, wind still variable, her heart rate elevated but controlled. She fired. The hide went still. 5 down. The second hide reacted to her shot, the shooter inside trying to locate her muzzle flash. Mackenzie was already on him, already firing, the training and the instinct and the 1,000 hours on the range all coming together in one smooth motion. Hit. 6 down. The third hide didn't move, didn't react. Either the shooter inside had iron discipline or he was playing a deeper game. Mackenzie waited, breathing, watching. Dalton had gone to ground, invisible again. The noisy movement stopped. The mountain was quiet except for wind and the distant sound of vehicles in the compound. Then the third hide moved, shifted, and Mackenzie saw what the shooter was doing. He wasn't tracking Dalton. He was tracking her, had somehow identified her position, was bringing his rifle to bear. She fired first. The range was 2,500 meters, the longest shot she'd ever attempted in combat, longer than her record, pushing the edge of what the rifle could do, what the bullet could do, what she could do. Time stretched, the bullet flew. She saw the impact through her scope, saw the hide shudder. 7 down, she whispered. Dalton's voice came over the radio, calm and steady. Nice shooting, how many left? If our count was right, 1, plus Ray's himself. And if our count was wrong, then we'll find out the hard way. Dalton made his way back to her position, moving carefully now, no more noise, no more bait. When he slid in beside her, she saw blood on his hand. You're hit, she said. Caught some rock splinters when one of them got close. It's nothing. Let me see. It's nothing. She grabbed his hand anyway, examined it in the red glow of her lead light. Multiple small cuts, already clotting, painful but not dangerous. You'll live, she said. That was the plan. They settled back into overwatch position, scanning for the 8th and final sniper. If he existed, if their count was right, if Ray's hadn't held back reserves. The compound remained quiet. Too quiet. Something's wrong, Dalton said. Mackenzie felt it too, the prickling awareness that comes from spending enough time in combat to develop a sixth sense for danger. Where is everyone? She asked. Compounds lit up, but I'm not seeing personnel movement. Dalton swept his binoculars across the facility, checking guard posts, checking fighting positions, checking the areas where men should be. Empty, all of it. They pulled out, Mackenzie said. Rays evacuated the compound while we were dealing with the flanking element. Dalton checked his watch. 0300, 3 hours until SEAL assault. He keyed his radio. Griffin 6, Overwatch. Compound appears abandoned. Repeat, compound appears abandoned. Recommend you hold position while we investigate. Lucas Chen's voice came back tense. Overwatch negative. We have orders to assault on schedule. If they've pulled out, we need to secure whatever intel they left behind. It's a trap, Dalton said. Has to be. Reyes doesn't run. Maybe he does when he's lost 7 snipers and a squad. Or maybe he's baiting us into the compound, so he can hit us where we can't see him coming. Silence on the radio. Lucas was thinking, weighing options. Finally, your call, Overwatch. Your eyes on target. Do we go or no go? Dalton looked at Mackenzie. She shrugged. Your experience against my computers, she said. What does your gut say? My gut says Reyes is playing a game we haven't figured out yet. But my gut also says we can't let him disappear back into Mexico with all his people and regroup. We may not get another shot at him. So we go. We go, but we go careful. Dalton keyed the radio. Griffin 6, green light on assault, but approach with extreme caution. Treat every building as hostile, every corner as an ambush. We'll maintain Overwatch. Copy Overwatch, moving now. Through their optics, Dalton and Mackenzie watched the SEAL team move in, 12 men in perfect tactical formation, clearing the approach, moving through the compound entrance. Professional, careful, everything right. And then the world exploded. The blast came from the southern edge of the compound, a massive fireball that lit up the night like dawn, the shockwave visible as it rippled across the desert. Secondary explosions followed, smaller but still deadly, and in the light of the flames Dalton could see the truth. The buildings were rigged. The whole compound was one giant trap. Griffin 6, report, Dalton transmitted urgently. Griffin 6, what's your status? Static, then Lucas's voice, strained but functional. We're clear. Blast was south side, we were entering north. Building we were about to enter just collapsed. If we'd been 30 seconds faster, we'd be dead. Pull back, Dalton ordered. Get your team out of there now. Negative, we're continuing clearance. This is our mission. Lucas, that compound is wired to blow. Reyes wanted you to go in. Don't give him what he wants. And let him escape, not acceptable. Mackenzie was scanning the ridges, the high ground, looking for the one sniper they hadn't found. Dalton, she said quietly, we've got a problem. He swung his scope to where she was looking and felt ice water replace his blood. On a ridge 2,800 meters to the south, barely visible in the firelight, a figure stood. Tall, gray-haired, holding a rifle. He wasn't hiding, wasn't concealed. He was watching. Reyes. The radio crackled, his voice calm as ever. Hello, James. Did you like my gift? The compound, the snipers, all of it. A test. To see if you were truly your father's son. You passed. You kept your team alive, killed my students, adapted to changing circumstances. Your father would indeed be proud. Dalton didn't respond, was ranging the target, calculating wind, doing the math for a shot that would be the longest of his life. But here's the thing about tests, James. They're not meant to be fair. They're meant to reveal truth. And the truth is, you can't save everyone. You can kill my snipers, you can protect those SEALs, but you can't stop what comes next. Movement in the compound. Not SEALs. Other figures emerging from hidden positions, from spider holes, from places they'd been waiting. The ambush element, the real trap. And in that moment, with Lucas and his team caught between rigged buildings and enemy fighters, with Reyes standing calm and confident at 2,800 meters, Dalton understood. He'd won the battle but walked straight into the war. Mackenzie's voice was tight. We need to do something, now. Dalton settled behind his rifle, found his breathing, found his calm. 2,800 meters. Beyond anything he'd ever attempted. Beyond the edge of possible. But possible was just another word for not yet done. Cover the seals, he said. Kill anything that moves toward them. I'm taking rays. That's almost 3,000 meters in variable wind with target elevation difference. That's impossible. Probably do it anyway. Mackenzie shifted her rifle to cover the seals, started firing, precise shots that bought them seconds and meters as they fought to break contact. Dalton ranged rays, 2,804 meters, wind 12 miles per hour gusting to 15, temperature 72 degrees, humidity 40%, downward angle 32 degrees. He did the math, all of it, every variable, every factor, every element that would affect the flight of a bullet traveling 1.74 miles. 78.6 MOA elevation, 13.2 windage. He dialed his scope, knowing the adjustments were educated guesses at this range, knowing 1,000 things could go wrong, knowing he had one shot because rays would disappear the moment he fired. Through his scope, Rays raised a hand, waved. Dalton's finger settled on the trigger. His father's voice in his memory, the longest shot is never about distance. It's about discipline. He fired. The rifle kicked. The world went quiet except for his heartbeat. He stayed in the scope, watching, waiting, as the bullet flew through darkness across a distance most men thought impossible. 4.1 seconds of flight time. Ray stood calm, confident, waiting for the miss he was certain would come. The bullet struck rock 2 feet to his left. Miss. But Ray's jerked back anyway, instinct overriding confidence. And in that moment of reaction, Dalton saw something he hadn't seen before. Ray's was human, could be surprised, could be scared. Could be beaten. Rays disappeared into the darkness, and the moment was gone, but something had shifted. The untouchable enemy had flinched. Mackenzie's rifle cracked again and again, covering the seals as they fought clear of the trap, and Dalton joined her, shifting targets, finding threats, eliminating them with the cold precision of 28 years of practice. By the time the sun began to gray the eastern horizon, the fight was over. The seals had extracted, bruised and shaken but alive. The compound burned behind them, and somewhere to the south, Rays was running. But he was running scared. And that, Dalton thought, was a start. The extraction helicopter came in low and fast at 0630, rotors beating the dawn air into submission. Dalton and Mackenzie climbed aboard with the kind of exhaustion that goes bone deep, the kind that comes from 12 hours of sustained combat operations, where every second could be your last. The SEALs were already on board, faces smudged with soot and sweat, eyes hollow with the 1,000-yard stare that meant they'd seen things they'd be processing for years. Lucas Chen sat across from Dalton, field dressing wrapped around his left forearm, blood seeping through despite the pressure. He looked at Dalton for a long moment, then nodded once. The warrior's acknowledgement. You kept us alive. I owe you. Dalton nodded back, no words needed. Mackenzie slumped against the bulkhead, rifle cradled like a child, eyes closed but not sleeping. Dalton knew that look. The adrenaline crash, the come down from the chemical high of combat, the moment when the body remembers it's mortal and sends every ache and pain forward for accounting. He felt it himself, the cuts on his hand throbbing, the old shrapnel wound in his leg burning like new, the headache building behind his eyes from hours of intense focus through a rifle scope. 47 years old, and some mornings he felt every single one of them. The flight back to Fort Bliss took 40 minutes. Nobody spoke. The door gunners watched the desert scroll by below, weapons ready, but the threat was gone. Reyes had vanished like smoke, taken his remaining forces and disappeared into the Mexican wilderness where even satellites struggled to find him. He'd lost his compound, lost his sniper cadre, lost his forward operating base on American soil. The buffer zone he'd wanted to establish was gone before it began. That should have felt like victory. It didn't. Colonel Hayes was waiting on the tarmac when they landed, along with medical personnel and a debrief team. The SEALs were triaged first. Lucas's arm wound serious enough to require immediate attention. Mackenzie waved off the medics, insisted she was fine, drank water and ate a protein bar and looked like she might fall over any second. Dalton let them check his hand, clean the cuts, bandage them properly. The medic, a young specialist who looked about 19, worked with efficient hands. "You're lucky, sir. Few millimeters deeper and you'd have nerve damage." "It's not luck if you plan for it," Dalton said. The kid didn't understand, moved on to check his vitals, pronounced him fit for duty despite looking skeptical about it. Hayes pulled Dalton and Mackenzie aside once the immediate chaos settled. "Debrief in 30 minutes. Clean up, get food, be in conference room 3. We need to know everything while it's fresh." They showered in separate facilities, changed into clean uniforms that felt strange after 12 hours in the field. Dalton caught his reflection in the mirror, saw the gray in his beard, the lines around his eyes, the scar tissue that mapped his career across his face and hands. Saw his father looking back at him, the same tired eyes, the same weight of command. He thought about the shot he'd missed, 2,804 meters, 2 feet left of target. At that range, 2 feet was nothing, was everything, was the difference between mission success and Reyes walking away. His father would have made that shot. Or maybe not. Maybe his father would have known better than to try. Maybe wisdom was knowing when the odds were too long, when the attempt itself was hubris. He dried off, dressed, headed for the conference room. Mackenzie was already there, looking more alert, coffee in hand. She'd pulled her hair back, put on the professional mask that officers wear when they need to be taken seriously. But Dalton could see the fatigue in her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands that came from sustained stress. "You okay?" he asked. "Define okay." "Functional." "I can shoot if that's what you're asking. Can you?" "Always." Hayes entered with 2 other officers Dalton didn't recognize, one Army, one Marine. They carried themselves with the bearing of people who made decisions that got other people killed and had learned to live with it. The debrief took 2 hours. Every shot, every movement, every decision dissected and analyzed. Dalton walked them through the engagement sequence, the sniper positions, the tactics Reyes' people had used. Mackenzie provided the technical data, ballistic solutions, range cards, wind readings. The kind of detailed documentation that would go into training manuals and after-action reports. The Army colonel, a man named Patterson with silver eagles and a Ranger tab, stopped them at the description of Dalton's final shot. "You attempted to engage at 2,800 meters." "Affirmative." "In variable wind at night, with an angular offset." "Yes, sir." "That's beyond the effective range of the weapon system." "I'm aware." "Then why attempt it?" Dalton met his eyes. "Because Reyes was standing there, confident we couldn't touch him. Because letting him think he's untouchable makes him dangerous. Because 2 feet is closer than infinite, and next time maybe I'm 1 foot closer, or the wind is calmer, or the math is better. You don't make impossible shots by never trying them." Patterson studied him for a long moment. That's either brave or stupid, Sergeant. The two aren't mutually exclusive, sir. Something that might have been a smile flickered across Patterson's face. No, I suppose they're not. The Marine officer, a lieutenant colonel named Briggs, leaned forward. Let's talk about Victor Reyes. You had radio contact with him multiple times during the operation. What's your assessment of his mental state? Dalton thought about the voice on the radio, the calm confidence, the personal nature of the challenge. He's rational, tactical, professional, but it's personal for him. The loss of his family, the betrayal he feels from the U.S. government, that's driving him more than money or ideology. He's fighting a war he thinks is righteous. That makes him more dangerous or less. More true believers don't quit. They adapt, they learn, they come back. Ray's lost this round, but he'll be planning the next one while we're still celebrating this one. You sound like you respect him, Mackenzie observed. I respect his capability. I don't respect his choice to use that capability against innocent people. Hayes pulled out a new folder, slid it across the table. We intercepted communications 3 hours ago. Reyes sent a message to his remaining cell leaders. He's pulling back to Nuevo Laredo, across the border, regrouping. Mexican authorities say they'll handle it, but we all know what that means. Nothing, Briggs said flatly. They'll handle it by pretending it's not happening. Which leaves us with a problem, Patterson added. Reyes is wounded but not dead. Los Sombras is diminished but not destroyed. And we can't pursue into Mexico without creating an international incident that makes the current border crisis look like a picnic. So we wait for him to cross back over, Dalton asked. Unless someone has a better idea. The room went quiet. Dalton could feel them all thinking the same thing, the unspoken option that hovered in the air like smoke. Send someone across. Deniable operation. No uniforms, no flags, no official sanction. Hayes cleared his throat. Sergeant Dalton, Captain Mackenzie, you're both dismissed. Get some rest. We'll reconvene in 12 hours for next steps. They stood, saluted, left the room. In the hallway outside, Mackenzie grabbed Dalton's arm. They're going to ask us to go into Mexico, she said quietly. Off the books. Deniable, illegal. Probably. And if we say no, then they'll find someone else. Someone who doesn't know Reyes' tactics, doesn't understand how he thinks. Someone who will probably die trying. So we have to say yes. We don't have to do anything. You're a captain with a career ahead of you. This could end that career permanently. Court-martial, prison time, dishonorable discharge. For what? Revenge against a man you've never met. It's not revenge. It's finishing what we started. You said it yourself, true believers don't quit. If we let him regroup, more Americans die. Mackenzie, you don't owe this. You don't owe me. You don't owe those SEALs. You don't owe anyone enough to throw your life away. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much in 29 years. Eyes that reminded him of his own when he looked in the mirror. My spotter died covering me. He made a choice to put my life ahead of his. Every day I wake up, I owe him. I owe him to be worth saving, to do things that matter, to not waste the second chance he bought me with his blood. Torres wouldn't want you to die for him. No, but he'd want me to live for something. This is something. Mackenzie paused, and something shifted in her expression, a hardening of resolve. I watched Torres bleed out in Syria. Took him 4 minutes to die. He used those 4 minutes to call wind adjustments so I could cover our exfil. Never complained. Never asked why it was him and not me. Just did his job until he couldn't anymore. She met Dalton's eyes. If I can't make hard choices for others the way he did for me, then what was the point of him saving me? I'd just be a coward carrying a dead man's sacrifice. Dalton started to argue, stopped. Saw in her face the same determination he'd seen in the mirror that morning when General Stone had asked him to come back. The need to prove something, if only to yourself. "Get some sleep," he said finally. "We'll talk after the next briefing." She nodded, walked away down the corridor. Dalton watched her go, then headed for his temporary quarters, a small room in the transient barracks that smelled like every military room he'd ever slept in. Sweat and cleaning solution and the particular mustiness of government-issue mattresses. He lay down fully clothed, closed his eyes and tried not to think about his father, about Kandahar, about 3 faces circled in red. Tried and failed. Sleep came anyway, the exhausted kind that offers no rest, just absence. He dreamed of ridgelines and bullet trajectories, of wind that shifted at the worst possible moment, of targets that were always 2 feet out of reach. He woke 6 hours later to pounding on his door. Mackenzie's voice urgent. "Dalton, we've got a problem." He was on his feet and armed before fully conscious, the muscle memory of 28 years responding before his brain caught up. He opened the door to find Mackenzie in full kit, face grim. "What happened?" Lucas Chen's team. They were ambushed 40 minutes ago, 6 miles inside Mexico, pursuing a lead on Reyes' location. They weren't authorized to cross the border. No, they went rogue. And now they're pinned down, taking casualties, and command is trying to figure out how to extract them without admitting we have forces in Mexico. Dalton's mind shifted into tactical mode, the personal exhaustion falling away like shed skin. How many? 12 SEALs went in. Current count is 9 still fighting. 3 confirmed KIA. They're requesting fire support, but there's no way to get air assets without Mexican approval. Where? She showed him a map on her tablet. A location 50 miles south of the border, in rough country outside Nuevo Laredo. The SEAL team had been trying to hit Reyes' command post, had walked into a prepared defense with at least 60 fighters and crew-served weapons. It was Kandahar all over again. Good men dying because of bad intelligence and worse decisions. Has anyone authorized a rescue operation? No, command is still arguing about political implications. Could be hours before they decide. Those men don't have hours. I know. Mackenzie looked at him, and Dalton saw the question in her eyes before she asked it. There's a ridge 3 miles from their position, 2,600 meters line of sight to the enemy command post. If someone could get there, provide precision fire support, the SEALs might be able to break contact. Someone meaning us. Meaning us. That's not just crossing the border, Mackenzie. That's a military operation on foreign soil without authorization. That's not court-martial territory. That's treason. I know what it is. And you want to do it anyway. I want to save 9 men who are dying, because they made the same choice we're about to make. Going after the enemy when command was too slow to act. Dalton thought about Lucas Chen, who'd looked at him with respect and gratitude. Thought about the young SEALs who'd trusted his overwatch, who'd walked into that compound because he'd told them it was clear. Thought about 3 operators in Kandahar who died because he'd made a call. Thought about his father, who'd made a promise to Victor Reyes decades ago, a promise that had turned into this war. How do we get there? Mackenzie took a breath. There's a civilian Black Hawk on the flight line. Contractor Bird, scheduled for a logistics run tomorrow. The crew chief is a former Night Stalker, flew with the 160th. His name is Rodriguez. I know him from Syria. And and I convinced him that we have authorization for an urgent reconnaissance flight. Told him it was time sensitive, that the paperwork was being expedited. He's willing to fly us on that verbal authorization, but only because he trusts me from our previous work together. You lied to him. I told him what he needed to hear to help save 9 Americans. If that's lying, then yes. Dalton looked at her, saw the weight of that decision in her eyes. This wasn't some cowboy move. This was her deliberately manipulating trust to achieve a mission objective, the kind of moral gray area that commanders lived in. When do we leave? 30 minutes, before anyone notices the helicopter moving. Let's go save some SEALs. The flight into Mexico was low and illegal, and probably the stupidest thing Dalton had done since Kandahar. The helicopter pilot, Rodriguez, asked minimal questions and kept the bird 50 feet off the deck, threading through canyons and following terrain that kept them off radar. Mackenzie sat across from Dalton, checking her rifle for the 3rd time, running through her pre-combat checklist with mechanical precision. But her hands were steady now, the tremor gone, replaced by the focused calm that came before action. You know this is crazy, right? Dalton said over the headset. You already mentioned that. Just making sure we're clear. We're clear, we're also committed. Can't change our minds now. The terrain below was harsh, broken country that looked like the surface of Mars, all red rock and deep arroyos and vegetation that survived more through spite than sunshine. In the distance, Dalton could see smoke rising, the signs of sustained combat. Rodriguez's voice crackled in the headset. LZ coming up in 2 minutes. I'll drop you and extract to a holding position 10 miles north. When you're ready for pickup, hit the emergency beacon and I'll come get you. What if we don't hit the beacon? Then I'll wait 12 hours and assume you're KIA. Either way, this bird was never here, I never flew you, and if anyone asks, we were doing pattern work at Bliss. Appreciate the discretion. Just bring my bird back in one piece. I still owe payments on her. The Black Hawk flared into a hover on the ridgeline, 6 feet off the deck. Dalton and Mackenzie fast roped out, hit the ground running, moved to cover. The helicopter thundered away, and silence fell like a hammer. They were in Mexico, without authorization, without support, without any legal justification that would stand up in any court. They were also in position to save 9 men. Dalton set up his rifle on the ridge, oriented toward the sound of gunfire 3 miles distant. Through his scope, he could see the battle unfolding. The SEALs were pinned in a depression, surrounded on 3 sides, taking sustained fire from elevated positions. Professional envelopment tactics. Rays had learned from their first encounter, had prepared for exactly this kind of assault. Mackenzie ranged the primary targets. 2,600 meters to their command post. I've got visual on what looks like a heavy machine gun position, another at 2,580, and observers calling fire from 2,700. Wind. She checked her instruments. 12 miles per hour, steady from the east, temperature 94 degrees, humidity 18%. Dalton did the math, the familiar calculations that had become as natural as breathing. At 2,600 meters, every variable mattered. Air density, temperature, wind, even the rotation of the Earth became factors that could mean the difference between hit and miss. I'll take the machine gun positions, he said. You take the observers. If we can blind them and suppress their heavy weapons, the SEALs can maneuver. That's a lot of ifs. Welcome to long-range precision fire. It's all ifs until the bullet lands. They settled into their shooting positions, the routine so familiar it required no thought. Check the rifle, check the scope, check the ammunition, check yourself. The 4 checks that kept snipers alive. Dalton found the first machine gun position in his scope, a sandbagged emplacement with crew-served weapon, maybe a Russian PKM or something similar. The gunner was pouring fire into the SEAL position, sustained bursts that kicked up dust and rock and kept good men pinned. Range 2,603 meters, downward angle 22 degrees, wind steady but strong. He calculated, adjusted, breathed. The world narrowed to the scope, the target, the space between heartbeats. He fired. The bullet took 4.2 seconds to travel 2,600 meters. Dalton stayed in the scope, watched it fly, watched it strike. The gunner jerked backward, the PKM going silent. Hit, Dalton reported, 1 down. Mackenzie's rifle cracked beside him. Through his peripheral vision he saw her brass ejecting, saw her work the bolt smoothly, saw her fire again. Professional, efficient, deadly. Observer down, she said, 2,700. Dalton shifted to the second machine gun position, found it, ranged it. 2,580 meters. The gunner had seen his partner die, was hunkered down, cautious. Caution wouldn't save him. Dalton waited for the moment when training overcame fear, when the gunner rose to lay down suppressive fire. Waited with the stillness his father had taught him, the stillness that separated the living from the dead. The gunner rose. Dalton fired. 2 down. For the next 15 minutes they worked like surgeons, precise and methodical. Every shot a calculation. Every calculation a kill. Machine gunners, observers, squad leaders, anyone who looked like they were coordinating the assault on the pinned SEALs. The enemy response was panicked, confused. They were taking casualties from an unknown position at impossible range. Some tried to return fire, spraying bullets in the general direction of the ridge, but at 2,600 meters, their AK-47s and M4s might as well have been throwing rocks. Dalton had fired 22 rounds when he saw movement in the enemy command post. A tall figure, gray-haired, moving with authority. Giving orders, reorganizing the defense, bringing discipline to chaos. Raise. Range 2,607 meters. Wind had shifted, now 14 miles per hour, gusting. The target was partially concealed behind a vehicle, only head and shoulders visible. It was the shot Dalton had missed the night before. The same range, the same target, the same impossible distance. His father's voice in his memory. Missing is just learning where not to aim next time. He ranged precisely, checked wind at multiple points downrange, calculated for temperature, for humidity, for barometric pressure, for every variable that affected the flight of a bullet traveling over 1.5 miles. 79.2 MOA elevation, 14.8 windage. He dialed his scope, knowing the numbers were as good as he could get them, knowing that at this range, luck mattered as much as skill. Mackenzie saw what he was doing. That's Ray's. I know. If you miss, he'll know we're here. He'll disappear again. If I hit, this ends. That's a lot of pressure for one shot. Story of my life. Dalton settled behind the rifle, found his breathing, found his calm. Thought about his father, about the man who'd taught Rays to shoot, who'd believed in the honor of warriors and the value of service. Thought about the promise broken, the trust betrayed, the friendship turned to enmity. Thought about 3 faces circled in red, and 9 SEALs dying in a depression 3 miles away. The world went quiet. No wind, no sound, no thought. Just the scope and the target and the moment between decision and action. He fired. The rifle kicked, the bullet flew. 4.3 seconds of flight time. Through the scope, Dalton watched Reyes, watched him give orders, watched him stand confident and untouchable. Watched him fall. The bullet struck center mass, and Victor Reyes dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The enemy command post erupted in chaos. Men rushed to their fallen leader, the coordinated assault falling apart into individual panic. The SEALs, sensing the shift, pushed out of their depression, laying down fire, maneuvering, breaking the encirclement. Mackenzie was already firing, covering their movement, dropping any enemy fighter who tried to reorganize. Lucas Chen's voice crackled over the emergency frequency. "Unknown friendly, this is Griffin 6. I don't know who you are, but you just saved our lives." Dalton keyed his radio. "Get your men out, Lucas. Move north. Extraction bird is waiting." "Overwatch, is that you?" "Move now, we'll cover." For the next 20 minutes, Dalton and Mackenzie provided precision fire support as the SEALs fought their way clear of the kill zone. Every shot counted, every hit mattered, every second bought was paid for in brass and lead, and the kind of focus that left you shaking when it finally broke. When the last SEAL crossed the ridgeline to safety, when the enemy had pulled back to lick their wounds, Dalton finally allowed himself to breathe. Mackenzie lowered her rifle, looked at him. "You hit him at 2,600 meters, in variable wind. That's impossible." "Apparently not." "How did you do it?" "I aimed 2 feet to the right of where I aimed last time." She laughed, exhausted and exhilarated and half hysterical. "That's not how ballistics works." "Sure it is, Miss Left aim right, basic math." "You're insane." "You said that already." "Still true." Dalton started packing his gear, movements automatic despite the exhaustion. They'd been in country for 3 hours, had fired 57 rounds combined, had killed or wounded an estimated 23 enemy combatants, and had just committed enough federal crimes to fill a legal textbook. "Time to go home," he said. Mackenzie hit the emergency beacon. In the distance, they could hear the sound of the Black Hawk returning. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we face the consequences of doing the right thing the wrong way." "Will it be worth it?" "Ask me after the court-martial." They flew back across the border as the sun climbed toward noon, the desert below shimmering in heat that made the horizon waver like a mirage. Rodriguez flew in silence, asked no questions, saw nothing, knew nothing. Fort Bliss was waiting. So was Colonel Hayes, with military police and expressions that said they knew exactly where Dalton and Mackenzie had been and what they'd done. Hayes met them on the tarmac, face carved from stone. "Sergeant Dalton, Captain Mackenzie, you're under arrest for unauthorized military operations on foreign soil, theft of military assets, and conduct unbecoming. You will be confined to quarters pending court-martial proceedings." Dalton saluted. "Understood, sir." "Was it worth it?" Hayes asked quietly so only they could hear. 9 SEALs are alive who'd be dead otherwise. You tell me, sir." Hayes looked at him for a long moment, then at Mackenzie. "Get them out of my sight before I say something I'll regret." The MPs led them away, not roughly but not gently, and as Dalton walked across the tarmac toward whatever came next, he felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Peace. He'd made the call, had trusted himself, had saved the men who needed saving. And if that cost him everything, at least it cost him for the right reasons. In his pocket his phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Well done, James. Your father would be proud. You passed the test. But the war isn't over. It's just beginning. See you soon. The message was unsigned, but Dalton knew who it was from. Reyes was alive. And this was far from finished. The holding cell at Fort Bliss was 8 feet by 10, concrete block walls painted institutional beige, a single metal bunk bolted to the floor, and a window so high and narrow it might as well have been decorative. Dalton had been in worse. Had spent 3 days in a spider hole in Ramadi with temperatures topping 120 degrees and insurgents walking overhead. Had survived 2 weeks in the Afghan mountains with a broken ankle and no resupply. A clean cell with running water and 3 meals a day was practically luxury. But the waiting was its own kind of torture. They'd separated him from Mackenzie immediately, standard procedure for co-conspirators, prevent them from coordinating their stories. Not that it mattered. There was no story to coordinate. They'd crossed into Mexico without authorization, conducted military operations on foreign soil, stolen government property, and disobeyed direct orders from multiple levels of command. The facts weren't in dispute, only the consequences remained uncertain. Dalton lay on the bunk, staring at the ceiling, counting the cinder blocks because it gave his mind something to do besides replay the last 72 hours. 144 blocks in the ceiling, 12 by 12. Simple math, clean math, the kind that had answers instead of questions. His phone had been confiscated along with his weapons, his gear, everything except the clothes on his back. But he remembered the text message, remembered Reyes' words, the test, the war just beginning. He'd hit Reyes' center mass at 2,600 meters, had watched him fall through the scope, but the message meant either Reyes had survived, which was unlikely, or someone else had taken over his operation, which was worse. The door opened without warning. General MacArthur Stone entered, alone, without guards, and stood in the doorway looking at Dalton with an expression that might have been anger or might have been respect, or might have been both. Dalton sat up, started to stand. "Stay seated," Stone said. "This isn't a formal visit." He pulled over the cell's only chair, sat down facing Dalton, close enough that they could speak quietly. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Saved 9 SEALs who'd still be dying in that depression if I'd waited for authorization. You conducted an unauthorized military operation in a sovereign nation. You stole a helicopter. You dragged Captain Mackenzie into a conspiracy that could end both your careers and possibly your freedom." "She volunteered, sir." "She's 29 years old. She doesn't have the experience to understand the consequences. She has the experience to know right from wrong, and leaving those men to die would have been wrong." Stone leaned back, studied Dalton with eyes that had seen 50 years of men making impossible choices. "Your father would have done the same thing," he said quietly. "In Vietnam in '71, his team got separated from the main body during an operation near Hue. Ambushed, pinned down, command refused to authorize extraction because it would have required crossing into Laos. Your father took 3 men, crossed anyway, pulled them out, saved 12 lives. They gave him an Article 15 and a Bronze Star on the same day." "I didn't know that." "He never told you because he didn't want you to think breaking the rules was heroic. But he also didn't want you to think following the rules was more important than saving lives." Dalton absorbed that, fitting it into the mental picture of his father, the man who'd taught him to shoot, who'd taught him patience, who died believing service meant something. "What happens now?" Dalton asked. Stone pulled out a folder, set it on his lap but didn't open it. "Officially, you and Captain Mackenzie are being court-martialed. Charges include conduct unbecoming, theft of military property, unauthorized engagement with foreign combatants, and about 15 other violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. If convicted on all counts, you're looking at 20 years in Leavenworth. Dalton nodded. He'd expected as much. Unofficially, Stone opened the folder, showed Dalton the first page, presidential letterhead, a pardon signed but not dated, held in reserve. Unofficially, the president is grateful that 9 SEALs are alive, grateful that Victor Reyes is wounded and on the run, grateful that Los Sombras has been effectively destroyed as a fighting force. But he can't say that publicly without admitting, we conducted military operations in Mexico, which would create an international incident that makes the current border situation look like a disagreement over parking. So I'm the sacrificial lamb. You're the deniable asset, the rogue operator who acted without orders, who will be publicly punished to satisfy Mexican demands for justice, and who will be privately pardoned once the political heat dies down. How long? 6 months, maybe a year. You'll be convicted, sentenced, spend enough time in confinement to make it look real. Then the pardon comes through, classified, and you walk away. And my record? Destroyed. Dishonorable discharge, forfeit all pay and benefits, stripped of rank and decorations. On paper, you'll be a criminal. In reality, you'll be free. What about Mackenzie? She gets promoted. Medal of Valor. Clean record. The narrative is that she was following your orders, didn't know the operation was unauthorized, acted in good faith. She won't accept that. She'll want to take responsibility. Then convince her otherwise. She has a career ahead of her. Don't let her throw it away for pride. Dalton looked at the pardon, at his name written in official script, at the presidential seal that meant this had been decided at the highest levels. And if I refuse, if I demand a real trial, put the facts on record, then you spend 20 years in prison and Mackenzie goes down with you. And 9 SEALs have to live knowing that the men who saved them were destroyed for doing it. Stone closed the folder. This is the deal, James. It's not fair, it's not just, but it's the best I could negotiate. Take it or leave it. Dalton thought about his father, about the Article 15 and the Bronze Star, about the price of doing what's right in a world governed by what's legal. I'll take it on one condition. Name it. Mackenzie never knows about the pardon. She thinks I'm actually going to prison. If she knows it's temporary, she'll fight it, demand to share the sentence. I need her to accept the promotion and move on. Stone studied him for a long moment. You care about her. She reminds me of what I was before Kandahar, before I stopped trusting myself. I won't let her become what I became. All right, she doesn't know, but you need to sell it, James. Make her believe you're at peace with the consequences. Dalton allowed himself a small, bitter smile. I've had a lot of practice pretending things don't hurt, sir. The court-martial was held in a closed military tribunal. No press, no spectators, just the panel of officers who would decide his fate and already knew what that fate would be. Dalton stood in his dress uniform, minus the rank insignia they'd stripped the day before, and listened to the charges read against him. Theft of military property, unauthorized use of deadly force, conducting military operations without proper authorization, conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman. The irony of that last one almost made him laugh. Everything he'd done had been exactly the conduct of an officer and a gentleman, the kind his father would have recognized and approved. But rules were rules, and he'd broken them all. Mackenzie sat in the gallery in her dress blues, looking like she wanted to fight everyone in the room. They'd let her testify, let her explain that she'd volunteered, that Dalton had tried to stop her, that the decision to cross the border had been mutual. The panel had listened politely and disregarded every word. The verdict took 4 hours to deliberate, which was 3 hours and 50 minutes longer than necessary. Everyone knew how this would end. Guilty on all counts. The sentence came down like a hammer: dishonorable discharge, forfeit all pay and allowances, confinement for 15 years. Dalton stood at attention, face expressionless, and accepted the judgment without reaction. This was theater performance, the price of 9 lives saved. The judge asked if he had anything to say. Dalton looked at Mackenzie, saw the fury and grief in her eyes, saw her about to stand and object. He spoke before she could. "I acted alone. Captain Mackenzie followed my orders believing them to be legitimate. She's guilty of nothing but trusting the wrong person. The responsibility is mine. I accept the consequences." Mackenzie was on her feet. "That's bullshit and you know it. I made the choice. I stole the helicopter. I pulled the trigger same as you." The judge banged his gavel. "Captain Mackenzie, you are out of order. Sit down or be removed from these proceedings." She didn't sit. Looked at Dalton with eyes that demanded he tell the truth, that demanded he not take this alone. Dalton met her gaze, put everything he had into making her understand. "Stand down, Captain. That's an order. I don't take orders from convicted criminals." "Then take advice from someone who cares whether you throw your career away. You have a future in this army. Don't waste it on guilt you don't deserve." The MPs were moving toward her, ready to escort her out. Mackenzie looked at Dalton, looked at the panel, looked at the whole rotten system that would destroy a good man for doing the right thing. Then she saluted him, sharp and precise and full of more respect than any general had ever earned. Dalton returned it, knowing it was the last time he'd wear the uniform, the last time he'd stand as a soldier among soldiers. They took him away in handcuffs, loaded him into a transport van, drove him to the military prison at Fort Leavenworth, where he'd serve his sentence in a 6x8 cell that made the holding cell at Bliss look spacious. But as they processed him in, as they took his fingerprints and his mugshot, and his dignity piece by piece, Dalton felt something unexpected. Relief. For 3 years he'd carried the weight of Kandahar, the guilt of 3 faces circled in red. Had questioned every decision, doubted every instinct, wondered if he could ever trust himself again. Now he knew. He'd made the call, had trusted his judgment, had saved 9 men who'd be dead otherwise. And if the price was his freedom, his career, his reputation, at least it was a price worth paying. The first week at Leavenworth was orientation, adjustment, learning the rhythm of institutional life. Wake at 0500, breakfast at 0600, work detail from 0700 to 1600, dinner at 1700, lights out at 2100. Every hour accounted for, every minute controlled. Dalton fell into it like a worn groove muscle memory from 28 years of military discipline. The other inmates, a mix of military prisoners from all branches, gave him a wide berth. Word had spread about who he was, what he'd done. In military prison there was a hierarchy, thieves and deserters at the bottom, violent offenders in the middle, and at the top, the ones who'd broken rules to save lives. Respect was currency here, and Dalton had it whether he wanted it or not. He worked in the prison workshop, building furniture that would be sold to fund prison programs. Measured wood, cut joints, assembled pieces with the same precision he'd applied to everything in his life. It was honest work, mindless work, the kind that let thoughts wander. He thought about Mackenzie, wondered how she was handling the promotion, the medal, the knowledge that her partner was locked away. Wondered if she understood that he'd done it to protect her, or if she just felt betrayed. He thought about Ray's, about the text message, about the war that wasn't over. Wondered if the man had survived, if someone else had taken up his cause, if Los Sombras would rebuild and come back stronger. He thought about his father, about promises kept and promises broken, about the legacy of warriors who trained their enemies and lived to regret it. On the 8th day, a guard came to his cell at 1900 hours, outside normal movement times. "Dalton, you have a visitor." "Who?" "Didn't say. Special authorization from the warden." They led him to a private visitation room, the kind reserved for lawyers and clergy, not the common area where inmates talk to family through plexiglass. The room held a table, 2 chairs, and General MacArthur Stone. The guard left them alone. Stone looked older than he had at the court-martial, more tired, the weight of command sitting heavier on his shoulders. "How are they treating you?" he asked. 3 meals a day, clean sheets, no one trying to kill me. It's practically vacation." Always the smart ass. "It's gotten me this far." Stone pulled out a folder, thinner than the last one, and slid it across the table. "I need to show you something, and I need you to keep your reaction controlled, because this room is monitored and we're being watched." Dalton opened the folder. Inside were photographs, recent photographs, of a small ranch house outside Missoula, Montana, his house, the cabin he'd built with his own hands. The cabin was burning. Dalton's hands tightened on the photos, but his face remained calm. "When?" "4 days ago. Fire department called it arson. Accelerant poured around the foundation, ignited remotely. No one was inside, no casualties, but the structure is a total loss." "Who?" "We don't know for certain, but we found this in your mailbox." Stone handed him a plastic evidence bag containing a piece of paper, scorched at the edges but readable. The message was handwritten in Spanish, translated in a note attached to the bag. "James, you took my home, I take yours. You took my men, I take your peace. You took my war, I make it personal. This ends in Nuevo Laredo. Come alone or more burns. Your friend, Victor." Reyes was alive, and he was done playing games. Dalton looked at Stone. "He's baiting me. Wants me to escape, cross into Mexico, give him the chance to kill me on his terms." "That's what we think. It's also possible he's planning something bigger. We've had intel chatter about a major operation, something that would make the compound attack look small." "And you want me to what? Rot in here while he burns down everything I care about?" "I want you to be patient. We have people working on this, teams hunting for Ray's, intelligence assets tracking his movements. We'll get him." "How long did it take to get Bin Laden?" 10 years. "This is different." "Is it? One man, hiding in hostile territory, protected by people who hate us. Sounds exactly the same." Stone leaned forward. "James, listen to me. Reyes wants you angry, wants you reckless. If you escape, if you cross that border, you play right into his hands. And this time, there's no pardon waiting. This time, you die in Mexico and the American government denies you ever existed. So I do nothing. You trust the system, trust that we'll handle this the right way." Dalton looked at the photos of his burning home, thought about everything he'd built, everything he'd lost, everything he'd sacrificed. "The system put me here for saving 9 men. The system will take a year to find Reyes, and in that year, how many more Americans die? That's not your responsibility anymore." "It became my responsibility when he made it personal." Stone stood, gathered the folder. I can't stop you from doing something stupid, but I can tell you that if you do, you're on your own. No support, no extraction, no backup. You'll be a fugitive from both governments, hunted by everyone. Dalton met his eyes. Wouldn't be the first time I've been alone behind enemy lines. Your father would tell you this is a mistake. My father taught me that some things are worth dying for. Maybe this is one of them. Stone walked to the door, stopped, turned back. The pardon. If you do this, it's void. You understand that. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison, assuming you survive. I understand. And you're doing it anyway. Dalton thought about 9 SEALs, about 3 operators in Kandahar, about his father and Ray's, and the long chain of choices that had led to this moment. Some debts you can't pay sitting in a cell. Stone nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer, maybe even hoped for it. When the guard comes back, he's going to find you unconscious. You'll wake up in the infirmary. In the confusion of a medical emergency, your restraints might not be properly secured. The perimeter fence has a maintenance gate on the northwest corner. The lock is broken. Has been for 3 days. Amazing that no one's noticed. Dalton stared at him. Sir, are you helping me escape? I'm an old man with failing memory, Sergeant. I don't recall this conversation at all. If they trace this back to you, you'll lose everything. I'm 68 years old. I've had my career, but those 9 SEALs have their whole lives ahead of them because of you. This is how I say thank you. Stone knocked on the door. The guard opened it. As he left, Stone looked back one last time. Your father would still think this is a mistake, but he'd also understand why you have to make it. Good luck, James. The door closed. Dalton sat alone in the room, looking at the photos of his burning home, feeling the weight of the choice he was about to make. He could stay, serve his time, let the system handle Ray's, trust that justice would be done eventually. Or he could finish what he started, face Ray's on his terms, end this war the way it needed to end. The guard came back 5 minutes later. Time's up, Dalton, back to your cell. As they walked down the corridor, Dalton measured distances, noted camera positions, cataloged exits and entries with the automatic assessment of a man trained to escape from anywhere. The guard was young, maybe 25, and he kept looking at Dalton with something like sympathy. You got a raw deal, he said quietly. Everyone knows it. What you did, saving those SEALs, that was hero shit. Just did what needed doing. Still, don't seem right, you being in here. They reached the cell. The guard unlocked it, stepped back to let Dalton enter. Dalton turned to face him. I'm sorry about this, he said. About what? Dalton moved fast, a palm strike to the guard's solar plexus that folded him without permanent damage, caught him as he fell, lowered him quietly to the floor, took his keys, his radio, his hat. Put the hat on, clipped the radio to his belt, walked back down the corridor like he owned it. 2 other guards saw him, nodded, went about their business. Just another guard on rounds. The infirmary was on the 2nd floor. Dalton took the stairs, encountered a nurse who asked if he needed something. Just checking the secure ward, he said. It's locked, you need authorization. Already got it. He showed her the guard's keyring, walked past before she could question it further. The northwest fence was exactly where Stone had said it would be. The maintenance gate hung loose, the lock clearly broken, a gap just wide enough for a man to slip through. Dalton looked back at the prison, at the walls that would have held him for 15 years, at the life he was leaving behind. Thought about Mackenzie, who who'd never forgive him for this. Thought about 9 SEALs who were alive because he'd made a similar choice. Thought about his father, about honor and duty, and the impossible space between rules and righteousness. Then he slipped through the fence and disappeared into the Kansas night. By morning, he was 3 states away, moving south toward the border, toward Mexico, toward the final confrontation with a man who'd been his father's friend and had become his enemy. Toward whatever ending waited at the Devil's Ridge. Behind him, alarms sounded, searches began, a manhunt launched. But Dalton was already gone, a ghost moving through America's heartland, heading for a war that had been waiting 40 years to be finished. And this time, only one of them would walk away. 3 days after breaking out of Leavenworth, James Dalton stood on the American side of the Rio Grande, looking across at Mexico and the war that waited on the other side. He'd traveled 1,000 miles on stolen motorcycles and hitchhiked rides, sleeping in ditches and abandoned buildings, living on gas station food and rainwater, moving like the ghost he'd been trained to be. Every law enforcement agency in the country was looking for him. His face was on every news channel, his story twisted into whatever narrative fit the political moment. Domestic terrorist, some called him, deranged veteran, dangerous fugitive. The truth, as always, was buried beneath the headlines. He'd lost everything now. His career, his freedom, his home, his name. All that remained was the mission: find Reyes, end this, whatever the cost. The crossing point he'd chosen was 60 miles from the nearest official border station, a stretch of river so remote that even the cartels didn't bother guarding it. The water ran shallow this time of year, maybe waist deep at the center, moving lazy and brown under the Texas sun. Dalton checked his gear one final time. The rifle he'd acquired from a pawn shop in Laredo, not military grade but functional, a Remington 730-06, enough for what he needed. 40 rounds of ammunition in 2 magazines, a knife, a canteen, a map, everything a man needed to die well in hostile country. He'd left a letter in a locker at the Greyhound station, addressed to Mackenzie to be opened if he didn't return. In it, he'd explained everything: the pardon that Stone had secured, the choice he'd made to void it, the reasons why some debts could only be paid in blood. He hoped she'd understand, hoped she'd forgive him for lying about taking this alone, hoped she'd forget him and build the career she deserved. The sun was setting when he stepped into the river. The water was cold despite the heat, moving faster than it looked, pulling at his legs with the patient strength of something that had been wearing down Stone for 10,000 years. He crossed in silence, rifle held high, eyes scanning the far bank for threats. Nothing moved. No guards, no cartel scouts, no one to witness this moment when he stopped being a fugitive and became an invader. When he climbed up the Mexican bank and stood dripping on foreign soil, Dalton felt something shift in his chest. A settling, a rightness, like a bone sliding back into place after months of being dislocated. This was where he was meant to be, where the story had always been heading. Where it would end. The compound Reyes had chosen for their final meeting was 40 miles south of the border, high in the Sierra Madre Mountains where the air was thin and the terrain brutal. Dalton had the coordinates from Reyes's letter, had studied satellite imagery during the drive south, knew exactly what he was walking into. A fortress, natural stone walls on 3 sides, a single approach from the north, elevated positions covering all angles. Reyes had chosen his ground well, the way a student of James's father would, the way a warrior who understood the advantage of defense would. Dalton moved through the mountains for 2 days, covering 20 miles a day through country that tried to kill you just for existing. rattlesnakes and scorpions, cliffs that crumbled under your weight, water sources that ran poison from old mining operations. This was where men went to disappear, where bodies could lie undiscovered for years. It was perfect. On the third day, he found a ridge 3,000 meters from Ray's compound, a position that offered line of sight to the main buildings and enough elevation to make the geometry work. It was the longest shot he'd ever attempted, beyond the longest shot anyone had ever made in combat, pushing past the edge of possible into the realm of pure mathematics and prayer. But Dalton hadn't come here to do the possible. He set up his position with the care of a man who knew this might be the last thing he ever did. Built a hide from local stone and vegetation, arranged it to blend with the ridge, made himself invisible to anyone who wasn't standing on top of him. Ranged the compound precisely, 3,017 meters, 1.87 miles. The bullet would be in flight for nearly 5 seconds, would drop over 200 feet, would drift in any crosswind like a leaf in a hurricane. Checked his ammunition, hand-loading each round, examining them for defects that at this distance would mean the difference between hit and miss by yards. Calculated wind at 5 different points along the bullet's path, using vegetation movement and thermal indicators, and the accumulated knowledge of 28 years spent reading air like poetry. Did the math, all of it. Elevation 83.7 MOA. Windage would depend on conditions at the moment of the shot, 16 to 22 MOA depending on how the canyon winds behaved. And waited. Patience was the sniper's greatest weapon. Not the rifle, not the bullet, not the skill. Patience. The ability to lie motionless for hours or days, to let discomfort become background noise, to exist in a state of relaxed readiness that could explode into action in microseconds. Dalton had learned patience from his father, who'd learned it in Vietnam, who'd probably learned it from his father in Korea, an unbroken chain of warriors teaching warriors how to wait for death to arrive at the speed of sound. The sun climbed and fell. The temperature swung from 100 degrees at midday to 50 at night. Dalton drank sparingly, ate nothing, kept his body in that state of minimal function that preserved energy and maintained focus. On the second day of watching, a helicopter landed at the compound. 6 men climbed out, and even at 3,000 meters, even through the heat shimmer and the distance, Dalton recognized the way they moved. Professional, military, the kind of contractors who worked for the highest bidder and didn't ask questions about legality or morality. Ray's was bringing in reinforcements, making this harder than it needed to be. Good, Dalton preferred his endings difficult, made them more honest. That evening, as the sun painted the mountains gold and purple, a figure emerged from the main building and stood in the courtyard, looking north, looking directly at the ridge where Dalton lay hidden 3,000 meters away. Victor Ray's. Even at this distance, Dalton could see the way he carried himself. Confident, erect, the bearing of a man who'd spent his life being dangerous and had never learned to be anything else. He wore casual clothes, jeans, and a white shirt, no armor, no tactical gear, standing in the open like he was inviting the shot. Like he knew Dalton was out there somewhere, watching, ranging, calculating. Ray's raised a hand, waved, then pulled out a radio and spoke. The transmission came through on the emergency frequency, the one Dalton had monitored but not used, and Ray's voice was as calm as it had been every other time. "Hello, James. I know you're out there. Know you made the crossing 3 days ago. Know you're set up somewhere between 2,500 and 3,500 meters, probably north where the sight lines are best. I've been waiting for you." Dalton didn't respond, didn't move, gave away nothing. Reyes continued. Your father and I, we had a conversation once. 1981, after a training exercise that went wrong. 3 men died because of bad intelligence, and your father blamed himself. I told him that command means living with the weight of every decision, good or bad. That the only way to survive it was to believe that you'd made the best choice with the information you had. He told me I was right in theory but wrong in practice. That some choices you can never make peace with, no matter how rational they seemed at the time. Dalton's finger rested on his trigger, listening. I think about that conversation a lot, James. Think about how your father carried those 3 deaths for the rest of his life. Think about how you're carrying your 3 from Kandahar. We're more alike than you want to admit. Both of us broken by command. Both of us trying to find meaning in service that broke us. The wind shifted, coming from the east now, stronger, 12 miles per hour gusting to 15. Dalton adjusted his calculations, preparing for a shot he hadn't decided to take yet. The difference between us, Reyes said, is that I accepted what your government made me. A weapon without a country, a warrior without a cause. But you still believe, still think service means something. Still think honor exists in a world that abandoned men like us the moment we were no longer useful. He paused, and in the silence, Dalton could hear wind moving through the canyons, could hear his own heartbeat, slow and steady and counting down to a moment still unwritten. So here's my offer, James. Walk away. Go back to America, turn yourself in, serve your time. Let this war end here. I'll disband what's left of Los Sombras, retire to somewhere quiet, and we'll both live to die of old age instead of bullets. Dalton keyed his radio for the first time, breaking 3 days of silence. And if I refuse? Then one of us dies today and the other lives with it. Same as our fathers lived with the men they killed and the wars they survived. There's no honor in it, James. No glory. Just 2 old warriors too stubborn to quit. I'm 47, not old. You've got the eyes of a 60-year-old. I've seen them in the mirror. The weight of command ages you in ways civilians don't understand. Dalton settled deeper into his shooting position, finding the bone support that would keep him steady through the shot. You killed 12 Border Patrol agents, 2 DEA officers, 6 civilians in crossfire. I can't walk away from that. And you killed 31 of my men, destroyed my compound, put me in a Mexican hospital for 3 weeks. We're both covered in blood, James. The question is whether we keep adding to it. The moral calculus was clean, simple. Reyes was a terrorist, a murderer, a man who'd chosen profit over honor. Killing him would save lives, would end Los Sombras, would finish what Dalton had started. But Reyes was also his father's friend, his father's student, a man who'd been created by the same broken system that had created Dalton. Through his scope, Dalton watched Reyes standing calm in the courtyard, arms spread, making himself the easiest target possible. You're not wearing armor, Dalton observed. No point. At 3,000 meters, body armor won't stop your bullet. If you make the shot, I die. If you miss, I know you tried. Either way, we'll have our answer. What answer? Whether your father's lessons are better than mine. He taught you patience, precision, honor. I taught my men aggression, adaptation, survival. Let's see which philosophy wins. The wind was steady now, 14 miles per hour from the east, temperature 78 degrees, humidity 32%, air density perfect for long-range work. Dalton had the solution, 83.8 MOA elevation, 18.4 windage. His finger took up the trigger slack. One question, he said. Ask. The men you brought in today, the contractors, they're not here to defend you. They're here to kill me after I shoot, aren't they?" Silence on the radio. Then Ray's laughed, genuine amusement. "Your father taught you well. Yes. They're positioned on the ridges around you, thermal optics, suppressed rifles. The moment you fire, they'll triangulate your position and put 20 rounds through your hide. You'll be dead before you see me fall." So this was never about a fair fight. War is never fair, James. It's about winning. Your father knew that. He just chose to fight fair anyway, and it cost him. Cost him what? His faith. By the end of Vietnam, your father had stopped believing the war meant anything. He still fought, still led, still saved his men, but he didn't believe anymore. I could see it in his eyes, the same emptiness I see in yours. Dalton thought about his father, about the man who'd taught him to shoot, who died of cancer with a metal box full of commendations and a heart full of questions. Thought about whether the old man had found peace at the end, or just exhaustion. "You're wrong," Dalton said. "My father believed until the day he died. Believed that service mattered, that honor was real, that protecting people who couldn't protect themselves was worth any price." Is that what you believe? It's what I'm betting my life on. Then take your shot, James. Prove me wrong. Show me that honor wins over survival, that righteousness beats pragmatism. Make the impossible shot and accept the consequences. Dalton's breathing slow, deepened, found the rhythm. His heart rate dropped to 50 beats per minute, the trained response of a body that had done this thousands of times. Through his scope, Ray stood waiting, patient as stone, giving Dalton the target he needed. The math was perfect. The conditions were as good as they'd get. The shot was possible, barely, on the edge of human capability. But the consequences were certain. Fire, and the contractors would kill him within seconds. Don't fire and Rays would disappear, rebuild, kill again. Some choices were impossible, because both options led to death. Dalton's father had faced those choices in Vietnam, had made the hard calls and lived with the weight. Now it was Dalton's turn. He thought about Mackenzie, about 9 SEALs, about 3 operators in Kandahar. Thought about every life he'd saved and every life he'd failed to save. Thought about whether any of it had mattered, whether any of it had been worth the cost. And realized he already knew the answer. Service mattered because he chose to make it matter. Honor was real because he acted as if it was. The price was worth paying because the alternative was becoming the emptiness Rays had described. His father had been right. Some things were worth dying for. This was one of them. Dalton's finger completed its press on the trigger. The rifle fired. The world went silent except for his heartbeat, and the sound of the bullet leaving the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, beginning its journey across 3,017 meters of Mexican desert. Through the scope, Dalton stayed on target, watching, waiting, as the bullet flew. 4.8 seconds of flight time. An eternity compressed into heartbeats. The bullet dropped 230 feet, drifted 18 feet east in the wind, fought gravity and air resistance, and the basic physics that said hitting a human-sized target at this distance was impossible. And found Victor Ray's center mass. The man dropped like a string-cut puppet, there and then gone, and Dalton felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, no triumph. Just the cold certainty of mathematics proving itself in flesh and blood. He heard the first contractor's bullet hit the rock beside his head before he heard the rifle report. Felt the second round tear through his hide, missing him by inches. Knew they had his position, knew they were ranging, knew he had seconds to live. Dalton rolled left, away from his hide, scrambling behind larger rocks as bullets stitched the air where he'd been lying. Counted at least 4 shooters, probably 6, all of them professional, all of them closing. His radio crackled, not raised this time. A different voice, American accent, cold and efficient. Unknown shooter, you're surrounded. Drop your weapon and stand with hands visible. You have 30 seconds to comply. Dalton checked his ammunition. 6 rounds remaining, against 6 contractors with better positions and better weapons. The math was clear. He keyed his radio. Tell me something. Did Rays pay you before or after the job? Before, half up front, half on confirmation. Why? Just wondering if you're motivated by money or completion. Money, always money. Then here's a counteroffer. I've got nothing to lose and 6 rounds left. I can't get all of you, but I can get some of you. Those some of you won't be around to spend Rays' money. So the question is, who wants to be the one who dies for a paycheck from a dead man? Silence on the radio. Dalton could almost hear them thinking, calculating, weighing profit against risk. The voice came back, cautious now. What are you proposing? I walk away. You collect your money from whoever's signing Rays' checks now, and nobody else dies today. We all go home. And if we refuse? Then I make this ridge expensive real estate, and you can explain to your families why you died for a Mexican drug cartel. More silence, longer this time. Then the sound of engines starting, vehicles moving away. The voice came back one final time. You've got balls, I'll give you that. We're pulling out. But if we ever see you again, the offer's off and you're dead. Fair enough. One more thing. What you did, that shot. I've been doing this 20 years and I've never seen anything like it. 3,000 meters in variable wind. That's not luck, that's something else. Practice, a lot of practice. Must have been some teacher. The best, Dalton said and meant it. The sound of the vehicles faded into the distance, and silence returned to the mountains. Dalton waited 30 minutes, making sure they were really gone, then moved to a new position and glassed the compound through his scope. The courtyard was empty, except for one figure lying motionless in the center. Victor Rays, dead at 3,017 meters, killed by the son of the man who taught him to shoot. It should have felt like victory. It felt like waste. Dalton packed his gear, erased all signs of his hide, and began the long walk back to the border. Behind him, the sun set over the Sierra Madre, painting the mountains in shades of blood and gold. Somewhere in that compound, Rays' men would find their leader, would bury him or burn him or feed him to the desert, whichever their traditions demanded. Los Sombras would fracture, splinter, maybe disappear entirely or maybe just rebrand under new leadership. The war would continue as it always did, because wars didn't end when men died. They just found new men to fight them. But this war, his war, was finished. The border crossing took 3 days of hard travel through country that grew more hostile the farther north he went. Dalton avoided roads, avoided towns, avoided any place where people might recognize his face from the news. He lived on creek water and the few supplies he'd carried. Lost 12 pounds he couldn't afford to lose. Felt every one of his 47 years in joints that ached and muscles that burned. But he kept moving, because stopping meant capture, and capture meant dying in a cell instead of dying free. On the morning of the 4th day, he crossed back into Texas at a point 50 miles from where he'd entered Mexico. The Rio Grande was lower here, barely ankle-deep, and he walked across without ceremony. American soil felt different under his feet. Not better or worse, just different. The weight of law, of civilization, of consequences waiting patiently for him to return to them. He sat on the bank and watched the sun rise over the desert, thinking about his father, about Ray's, about the long chain of choices that had led two sons of warriors to kill each other in a war neither of them had started. His radio crackled, a voice he recognized immediately. "Mackenzie." "Dalton, if you're hearing this, I need you to know something. I found your letter. Read it 3 times before I believed it. You're an idiot, you know that. A noble, self-sacrificing idiot who thinks protecting me is worth throwing everything away." He smiled despite himself. She continued, "I also need you to know that I'm standing about 200 meters south of your position with a pair of binoculars, and I've been tracking you since you crossed the border. You're a fugitive, I'm an army officer, and by all rights I should be calling this in." Dalton scanned the terrain, found her on a low ridge, exactly where she said she was. "So why aren't you?" he asked into the radio. "Because General Stone made some calls. Because the president decided that a dead terrorist leader was worth more than a public trial. Because they'd rather you disappear quietly than turn this into a media circus about military prison breaks and unauthorized operations." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the pardon is back on. Classified, deniable, but real. You serve 6 months in a comfortable military facility, do some consulting work on long-range tactics, and then you're free. Clean record, full benefits, honorable discharge." Dalton closed his eyes, feeling something break inside him that might have been relief or might have been grief. "I killed Ray's." "I know, Stone told me. 3,000 meters. They're calling it the longest confirmed kill in history." "Does it matter? Does any of it matter?" Mackenzie was quiet for a long moment. 9 SEALs think it matters. A dozen Border Patrol families think it matters. I think it matters. "And what do you think about me lying to you?" "I think you're a stubborn old man who doesn't know how to accept help. I think you've been carrying weight that isn't yours to carry. I think your father would be proud of the shot and ashamed of the martyrdom." "My father carried the same weight." "Which is how you know it's possible to carry it without destroying yourself. He lived to 68, raised you, had a life. You can too." Dalton stood, shouldered his pack, started walking toward her position. "What happens now?" "Now you come with me. Get cleaned up, debriefed, processed through the system quietly. In 6 months you're free. After that, up to you. And if I say no, if I keep running, then I arrest you. Because I care about you too much to watch you die alone in the desert when there's another option." He climbed the ridge, found her waiting with a vehicle, with clean clothes, with water and food, and the beginning of an ending that didn't involve bullets. Mackenzie looked at him, really looked, and saw what the desert had taken. The weight loss, the exhaustion, the 1,000-yard stare that came from killing a man at 3,000 meters, and knowing it was the right choice and the wrong choice and the only choice all at once. "You look terrible," she said. "Feel worse?" "Good, maybe you'll finally learn to ask for help." "Maybe." They drove north in silence, watching the desert give way to civilization, watching the war recede into memory and history, and the stories old men tell when they've survived long enough to tell them. 6 months later, James Dalton walked out of a military consulting facility in Virginia with an honorable discharge, full benefits, and a reputation as the sniper who'd made the impossible shot. The media never learned the full story. Officially, Victor Reyes had been killed by Mexican military forces during a raid on his compound. Los Sombras had fractured and faded. The border crisis had eased, though new crises would always rise to replace old ones. Dalton went back to Montana, bought land near where his old cabin had stood, and started building again. This time with help. Mackenzie visited when her duties allowed, brought other soldiers, turned it into a training ground for the next generation of long-range shooters. They called it Dalton Ridge, and the unofficial motto was painted on a sign over the entrance. Some shots are impossible until you take them. On quiet evenings, Dalton would sit on the porch of the new cabin and watch the sun set over the Bitterroot Range, and think about his father, about Rays, about the long chain of warriors teaching warriors how to survive wars that never truly ended. He'd made the shot, had proven it was possible, had paid the price and survived to tell about it. But the weight remained, as it always would, the burden of command and the cost of choosing right over easy. Some debts could be paid, some wounds could heal, but some things you carried forever, and the only choice was whether you carried them into darkness or into light. James Dalton chose light. Not because it was easier, but because his father would have expected nothing less. And that, in the end, was the only shot that really mattered. Real talk, this took me 3 days to research and a week to craft. I wanted to honor the reality of what snipers face, the math, the patience, the weight of every trigger pull. Question for the room: if you were the commanding officer, would you have authorized that Mexico mission? Or would you have let those 9 SEALs die by the book? Drop your answer below. No wrong answer here, just want to hear how you see it. And hey, if you made it this far, you're my people. Hit that subscribe button. Next story drops in 7 days.